Woken by the watchman's bell. At exactly 4 in the morning, the heavy metallic clang of the watchman's bell cut sharply through the silence of the sleeping household. In the deep darkness of the pre-dawn hours, this bell was not just a call to rise, it was a summons drenched in urgency and unspoken fear. For servants in medieval and early modern households, missing the watchman's bell was a grave mistake, one that often invited swift and harsh punishment. It was a sound that stirred more than just bodies. It stirred anxiety, a reminder of strict discipline and relentless demands. The servants, living in quarters often crammed near the kitchen or stables, were accustomed to this jarring start. Their sleep was always light and fragmented, never truly restful. They lay on narrow straw beds, the rough fibers pressing unevenly against their skin, their few possessions stacked in the dim corners of cramped rooms. When the bell sounded, there was no leisurely rising. Instead, a rush began, a fumbling in near total darkness as hands scrambled for cold, heavy clothes and worn shoes, stiffened from the night's chill. They could not afford the luxury of warmth or comfort. The night air, often damp and biting, seeped through cracks in poorly insulated walls and windows without glass, penetrating their thin garments as they prepared to face another long day. This moment, this 4 a.m. bell, symbolized more than just the start of work. It was a rigid marker of control, a constant assertion of authority over bodies and time. The watchman, typically a figure appointed to enforce discipline and security, wielded his bell like a weapon against idleness and disobedience. To him, the sound was a sharp instrument, slicing through the servant's fragile peace, demanding immediate obedience. The entire household depended on this signal. The kitchen fires had to be stoked, the castle gates checked, the Lord's chamber prepared, and all tasks initiated precisely on time. Life for servants was a relentless cycle dictated by such signals. Their day began in darkness, often before the first glimmers of dawn, and stretched into the late hours, governed by the needs and whims of their masters. Many historians note that the watchman's bell was part of a larger system of labor control that kept the wheels of feudal estates turning. It enforced punctuality through fear, underlining that no servant's time was their own. The watchman himself was a living embodiment of authority, both feared and resented, yet essential for maintaining order. The consequences of ignoring or missing the bell could be severe. Servants who failed to answer the call risked punishments ranging from verbal reprimands to physical beatings or withholding of food. Records from the period show that such infractions were met with swift justice, often publicly, to deter others. The bell, therefore, was not merely a sound, but a tool of psychological control, embedding the servant's subservience deep into their daily existence. It fractured any semblance of personal rest or freedom, tethering them strictly to their labor roles. This ritual waking was not just about discipline, but also about survival. In a time without modern lighting or heating, the early morning hours were the coldest and darkest, and every task left undone could lead to cascading failures in household management. Food preparation, animal care, fire maintenance, all depended on the prompt, coordinated effort that began at the toll of that bell. Missing this signal could jeopardize the entire household's functioning and status. The watchman's bell also connected to a larger cultural landscape, where time itself was experienced differently. Unlike today's clocks and alarms, time in the medieval period was communal and governed by bells, church bells, market bells, and watchman's bells, each dictating social rhythms. The watchman's bell was one of the earliest signals of daily life's commencement for the working class. For the servants, it was a ritual that both began their day and reminded them of their place in a strict social hierarchy. Some accounts from the era describe the groggy but dutiful responses of servants to this harsh awakening. They would stumble from their straw beds, their hands shaking as they dressed, the cold air sharp on their skin. Conversations were minimal. There was no time or space for complaints. The focus was on efficiency and silence, as noise might disturb the sleeping household or draw unwanted attention from the lord or lady. The servants' quarters were places of economy and endurance. Worn shoes, patched clothes, and a few treasured possessions hidden under straw beds or inside wooden chests. This bell was the invisible master of their day, orchestrating their movements, keeping time in a world without watches or personal clocks. It served as a constant reminder of the social and economic realities of their lives, servitude defined by rigid schedules, harsh conditions, and an ever-present fear of punishment. To imagine the watchman's bell ringing at 4 a.m. is to glimpse a world where control was absolute and personal agency scarce. It is to understand how labor and discipline intertwined to shape daily existence. Behind that single resonant toll lay stories of exhaustion, resilience, fear, and survival. A profound human drama played out in the shadows of history. So next time you hear a bell or alarm in the early hours, remember that for countless servants across centuries, such sounds were both a lifeline and a chain, marking the start of days lived in service, under constant watch, beneath the unyielding gaze of authority. The watchman's bell was not just a call to wake, it was a summons to endure. 4:30 a.m. Hauling water from the well. At 4:30 in the cold, unforgiving dawn, before the first rays of sunlight touched the stone walls of the manor, the servants were already stirring. The air was thick with frost, the ground slick with ice and dew. This was the hour when the quietude of the estate was still intact, the nobles buried deep in their heavy beds, unaware and untouched by the laborious tasks about to unfold. For the servants, the day had already begun, marked not by leisure, but by relentless toil and rigid discipline. One of the most grueling and essential duties at this hour was hauling water from the well, a task deceptively simple, yet brutal in its demands. The well, usually situated in the courtyard or a shaded corner of the grounds, was the lifeline of the household. There were no modern plumbing systems, no running water to ease the burden. Every drop needed for cooking, cleaning, washing, and even the rare moments of comfort had to be pulled up by hand. This responsibility fell to the lowest-ranked servants, often the young and inexperienced, who bore the physical brunt of the work. Drawing water in the dead of night or early morning presented challenges beyond the weight of the buckets. The temperature could plunge well below freezing, causing the courtyard stones and the wooden bucket handles to become slick with ice. The buckets themselves were filled to the brim with cold, dense water, each weighing as much as 10 or 15 kilograms, depending on the size of the vessel. The servants, clad in threadbare clothes that barely kept the chill away, grasped the icy ropes, their fingers numb and stiff. Every movement required focus and strength, yet the cold sapped their energy and blurred their senses. The well was no mere convenience. It was a harsh proving ground. One misstep on the slippery stones could send a bucket crashing to the ground, spilling precious water that could never be wasted. Such accidents were not just failures, but invitations to punishment. Nobles and overseers, awake or roused by noise, would exact harsh discipline. Beatings were common, serving as brutal reminders of the servant's place within the hierarchy of the estate. The threat of physical violence loomed over every movement, sharpening the tension and fear that already weighed heavily on the workers' shoulders. This early morning chore was a crucible of endurance, humility, and servitude. The servants had to move swiftly but carefully, hauling the water to the kitchens, the washrooms, and wherever else it was demanded. Every bucket was a testament to survival, a fragile thread sustaining the luxurious lives within the manor walls. The water, though cold and heavy, was a symbol of life itself, drawn at the cost of pain and exhaustion. Historically, this task was emblematic of the vast gulf between the ruling classes and those who served them. The noble family lived with comfort and ease, shielded from the physical hardships and dangers that the servants faced daily. The servants were invisible workers, essential yet unacknowledged, their labor the foundation upon which the nobility's privilege rested. Their days began in darkness, marked by tasks like hauling water, carrying firewood, cleaning chambers, and preparing elaborate meals, all performed under strict supervision and threat of punishment. To understand the full gravity of hauling water at 4:30 a.m. is to glimpse the harsh realities of medieval and early modern domestic life. This chore was not just about utility. It was a ritual of submission, a daily reminder of social order and control. The servants' bodies bore the signs of their servitude: calloused hands, bruises from falls or blows, exhaustion etched into their faces. Their lives were governed by the relentless rhythms of the household clock, where every minute counted and every mistake could have severe consequences. Yet, despite these brutal conditions, the servants developed resilience and solidarity. The water hauling duty, while punishing, also fostered a quiet camaraderie among those who shared the hardship. Whispered words of encouragement, subtle glances, and fleeting moments of shared humanity punctuated the bleakness of the pre-dawn labor. They were bound together not only by obligation, but by the shared experience of survival in a world that offered them little mercy. This moment, frozen at 4:30 a.m., is a portal to a vanished world, one where water was more than a resource, where the act of drawing it was infused with risk and pain, where power dynamics were etched into the very physicality of labor. It reminds us that the luxuries and comforts we take for granted today were once secured through hardship and sacrifice, often unseen and unacknowledged. In the silence before the dawn, with frost biting at their skin and the weight of the bucket pulling at their arms, the servants labored not just for water, but for the continuation of a social order that would scarcely recognize their suffering. Each trip to the well was a journey into the heart of servitude, a testament to the invisible hands that sustained the world of the privileged. This was life lived on the margins of history, hard, unforgiving, yet undeniably vital. Thus, the story of hauling water at 4:30 a.m. is not merely a tale of physical exertion. It is a profound reflection of human endurance, social hierarchy, and the stark realities of a time when survival depended on the strength to carry burdens both visible and invisible. It compels us to remember those who toiled in the shadows, shaping history with sweat and silence, long before the dawn ever broke. 5 a.m. Starting the fires in 12 chambers. At 5 in the morning, long before the lords and ladies of the castle stirred from their beds, the youngest boys among the servants were tasked with a responsibility both critical and perilous, starting the fires in the 12 hearth chambers. These boys, often barely into their teens, were entrusted with kindling the flames that would warm the vast stone halls and kitchens of the manor. In an era when central heating was unknown and cold stone walls could bite through even the thickest woolen garments, the fire was life itself. Comfort, sustenance, and security all depended on it. Lighting these hearths was no simple matter. The process demanded careful precision, knowledge passed down through the ranks of servants, and an almost ritualistic reverence for the fragile embers. One wrong move, one stray spark, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Smoke could fill the halls before dawn, triggering chaos and panic among the household. Worse still, a careless blaze might spread beyond control, threatening the entire estate. The boy responsible for such negligence risked harsh punishment or outright expulsion, as the safety of the entire castle depended on his steady hands and unwavering focus. The fires were lit in 12 separate chambers, each with its own purpose and personality. The great hall's massive hearth, where feasts and councils took place, required a robust blaze that could sustain hours of use. The kitchens, with their array of pots and cauldrons, needed steady heat, but also careful management to avoid ruining the delicate balance of the day's meals. Private chambers had smaller, more contained fireplaces, intended to provide gentle warmth without smoke drifting into sleeping quarters. Each hearth demanded a distinct approach, and the boys had to master them all, often under the watchful eye of older servants who understood the stakes. The act of lighting these fires began in near darkness, with only the faint flicker of an oil lamp or a candle to guide trembling hands. The boys carried bundles of kindling, carefully selected dry twigs, shavings, and sometimes fine straw, all arranged meticulously to ignite quickly but safely. Before the use of modern lighters or matches, fire was often sparked by striking flint against steel or coaxed from embers preserved overnight in ashes. These embers were precious, a glowing remnant of the previous day's fire, carefully shielded from the cold. Using the embers to start new fires required patience and skill, as the boys fanned them slowly, encouraging the flames to grow without letting them flare wildly. Failure was not taken lightly. The castle was a place of order and hierarchy, where every servant had a role to maintain the smooth running of the household. An out-of-control fire was not only dangerous, but a threat to the status quo. The nobility depended on the servants to maintain appearances of grandeur and safety. When smoke crept through the corridors prematurely, it risked waking the household in alarm and could mark the offending servant for disgrace. In some cases, repeated mistakes led to dismissal, or worse, physical punishment. These young boys had to learn the gravity of their task from a very early age. But there was more than fear at stake. The ritual of fire starting was deeply embedded in the rhythms of daily life. The warmth from the hearth chased away the chill that crept through thick stone walls and high ceilings. It transformed cold, damp rooms into spaces where people could gather, work, eat, and rest. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows, bringing a kind of life to the otherwise austere chambers. In the kitchens, the fire was the heart of sustenance, slowly roasting meat, boiling broth, baking bread, and melting cheese. Without these fires, the castle would be a silent, frozen shell, devoid of comfort or function. Historical accounts and household records reveal how essential fire was to medieval castle life. Servants learned early that managing fire was as crucial as any other skill: cleaning, serving, or tending animals. This responsibility often fell to the youngest boys, partly because it was a task that required nimble fingers and quick reflexes, and partly because it was a way to teach discipline and respect for danger. Many of these boys began their service as scullery or kitchen helpers, gradually advancing in rank as they demonstrated reliability. Lighting fires before dawn also underscored the relentless demands placed on servants. The nobility's day began with the sun, and the castle had to be ready at the first light. Servants worked in the shadows long before their masters opened their eyes, their labor invisible yet vital. This early morning task exemplified the broader world of medieval servitude, a world defined by hierarchy, duty, and the constant threat of punishment for failure. In a time without modern safety standards or firefighting equipment, the knowledge of fire management was passed from master to apprentice, embedded in oral tradition and strict routines. The castle's survival literally depended on these small hands and their ability to kindle and control the flames that warmed stone and soul alike. Thus, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the youngest boys labored quietly in the hearth chambers. They were the unseen guardians of warmth and safety, their hands carrying sparks that bridged the dark chill of night to the vibrant life of day. Every flicker they coaxed alive was a testament to their skill, courage, and the fragile balance between order and chaos in medieval castle life. 5:30 a.m. Preparing the lavatory bowls. At 5:30 in the morning, long before the first pale light of dawn slipped through the heavy curtains of the great manor, a quiet and exacting ritual unfolded behind closed doors. The servants, long trained in the delicate art of discretion and precision, moved silently through shadowed corridors toward the private chambers of the noble family. Their task was a simple one in description, but complex in execution: preparing the lavatory bowls. These humble vessels were vital instruments of personal hygiene, a necessity in an age before, for modern plumbing, yet they were also objects steeped in strict etiquette and social hierarchy. The lavatory bowl was not just a basin for washing. It was a symbol of status and propriety, an extension of the noble's dignity that demanded the utmost care. Servants would first warm the cloths, often soaked in scented water, carefully heated by the kitchen fire, a small luxury in the chill of the pre-dawn hours. The warmth of the cloth was a comfort to the noble waking from sleep, a gentle invitation to cleanse and prepare for the day ahead. The fresh wash basins, polished to a soft gleam, were placed meticulously in exactly the right spot, never too close, never too far, lest the noble's routine be disrupted. This preparation was a delicate dance of timing and silence. To enter too early risked disturbing the noble's precious rest, an offense that could bring swift reprimand or worse. To arrive late was to signal neglect and disrespect, threatening the servant's standing and livelihood. The servants learned to read the subtle cues, the faintest sound of stirring, a breath caught in sleep, the movement of curtains, guiding their approach with near-perfect intuition honed by years of repetition. Lavatory practices during this era were dictated by both practicality and a strict social code. Without running water or indoor plumbing, the use of portable wash basins was a daily necessity, especially among the upper classes who prided themselves on cleanliness and presentation. The noble's morning ablutions began with the servant bringing a basin filled with warm water, sometimes infused with herbs or fragrant oils to mask the odors of the day before. The warmed cloths allowed for a refreshing wash of the hands and face, a ritual that was as much about preparing the body as it was about asserting control over one's appearance and social standing. This moment, seemingly trivial to modern eyes, carried significant weight in the hierarchy of the household. The noble's waking was the signal for the day's entire rhythm to begin, and the servants' careful preparation ensured that this transition was smooth and unobtrusive. Behind the scenes, the staff moved with a shared understanding that their actions, though unseen, were critical to maintaining order and respect within the household. The preparation of lavatory bowls also reveals much about the broader social context of the time. The strict separation between servant and master extended into the realm of personal hygiene, where the servant's role was to enable the noble's comfort without overstepping boundaries. Privacy was paramount, and servants had to master the balance of presence and invisibility. Any hint of intrusion could be perceived as insolence, or worse, a threat to the social order itself. Moreover, the warming of cloths and preparation of water required resources and labor that underscored the privileges of the wealthy. The poor and lower classes lacked such luxuries, often washing in cold water drawn from wells or rivers, with little consideration for comfort or scent. In this way, the simple act of preparing lavatory bowls was both a practical task and a vivid marker of class distinction. In addition, the entire process was embedded in the broader rituals of morning service, a carefully choreographed routine where each servant had precise duties, and any disruption could cascade into chaos. The timing had to synchronize with other activities: lighting the fires, preparing meals, readying clothes, and attending to other personal needs. The servant preparing the lavatory bowls often worked closely with chambermaids, valets, and even the chamberlain, all ensuring that the noble's morning unfolded flawlessly. Failure to execute this task correctly could have severe consequences. Nobles were known for their quick tempers and strict expectations. A cold cloth, an empty basin, or a misstep in timing could lead to humiliation or punishment for the servant. This pressure created an atmosphere of constant vigilance and silent urgency among the staff, who operated under a system where every detail mattered immensely. Understanding this morning ritual also sheds light on the intimate, though unequal, relationship between servants and their lords. The preparation of personal items like lavatory bowls required trust, a level of access few others had. Yet this trust was bounded by rigid social rules that kept servants always aware of their place. The task demanded a mix of attentiveness, discretion, and humility, qualities essential for survival in such hierarchical environments. As the warm cloths were laid down and the polished bowls set with care, the servant would retreat silently, leaving the noble to begin their day refreshed and dignified. This quiet service, invisible to the eye of the outside world, was a vital thread in the fabric of aristocratic life. It was a moment where the practical needs of hygiene intersected with the intricate dance of power, respect, and social order. In essence, the preparation of lavatory bowls at 5:30 a.m. was far more than a mere chore. It was a testament to the discipline, precision, and complexity of life behind the grand facades of noble households. It reflected the subtle but relentless ways in which social hierarchies were maintained through ritual, routine, and the unspoken rules that governed every waking moment. This act, repeated daily, was a quiet affirmation of privilege, a ritual that bridged the intimate and the institutional, revealing the hidden layers of history in a single warm cloth and a simple wash basin. By appreciating this small yet profound moment, we gain insight into the lived experience of servants and nobles alike, into the rhythms of a world where power was expressed not only in grand gestures, but in the precise timing of a servant's footsteps and the careful placement of a humble basin. This ritual endures as a silent witness to the complex tapestry of human history, where even the smallest acts hold immense meaning. 6:00 a.m. Serving the Lord's first drink. At the break of dawn, just as the pale light of morning seeped through the heavy tapestries of the great hall, a delicate ritual unfolded, one that few outside the castle walls ever truly understood. It was exactly 6:00 a.m., the hour when the Lord's first drink was served, a moment steeped in quiet tension and silent power. The servants, ever watchful and disciplined, moved with precise grace through shadowed corridors, bearing a single precious vessel, a cup filled with warmed wine or ale. This was no ordinary drink. It was the very first taste of the day for the Lord, a symbol not only of refreshment, but of authority and expectation. The preparation of this simple cup was itself an act of ritualistic importance. The wine or ale was never served cold. It was gently warmed over low flames, careful not to spoil its delicate flavor or warmth. In medieval times, the quality of such drinks was variable. Wine was often sour, ale could be thick and bitter, so warming helped mask some imperfections and soothed the throat. But more than this practical consideration, warming the drink spoke to a deeper tradition of care and deference. The servants had to ensure the cup was neither too hot to burn nor too cool to offend, striking the perfect balance that would please the Lord and signal their attentiveness. The silence that accompanied this service was deafening. no clatter of dishes, no bustling of voices. Only the soft footsteps of the chosen attendant, cloaked in humility and trained for this exact moment. To serve the Lord's first drink was to walk a razor's edge of danger and honor. One misstep, a wrong tone in the voice, a faltering hand, even a glance that dared meet the Lord's eyes, could spell disaster. Medieval lords were men of fierce temper and keen suspicion. The slightest perceived disrespect could lead to harsh punishment or a fall from favor. Thus, the servants' eyes were fixed firmly on the ground, their posture rigid but respectful, embodying the submission expected in a feudal society governed by strict hierarchies and power dynamics. This moment, though seemingly small, was layered with psychological and political weight. For some lords, it was a chance to issue commands before the day's chaos began, to set the tone and agenda, to test the loyalty of their household, or even to exact immediate obedience. A whispered word, a glance over the cup's rim, a subtle gesture could alter the fate of a servant or courtier in an instant. The Lord's first drink was a ritualized opening of the day's social order, a quiet but unmistakable exercise in control. The drink itself was often a test, not only of the servant's skill, but of their attentiveness to the Lord's personal preferences and moods. In many medieval households, wine or ale was flavored with herbs and spices, cinnamon, cloves, honey, or sometimes even bitter wormwood, to enhance taste and promote health. A cup too bitter or too sweet might signal negligence, or worse, an intentional slight. The Lord's reaction could be telling. A pleased nod might secure a favored position. A grimace could lead to whispers in the hall, or worse punishments. Beyond the immediate household, this morning ritual reflected the broader social and cultural values of medieval Europe. The Lord's domain was one of rigid order, where every role was defined by duty and obligation. The first drink service was a microcosm of this system, illustrating how power was maintained through symbolic gestures and ritualized interactions. The act of serving the drink was both a demonstration of loyalty and a reaffirmation of the servant's place within the feudal hierarchy. It reminded all who witnessed or heard of it that authority was absolute, and the smooth running of the Lord's Day began with this moment of submission. Interestingly, historical records and chronicles hint that in some noble courts, the Lord's first drink carried even more complex layers of meaning. It was not uncommon for lords to use this opportunity to gauge the mood and readiness of their household, reading subtle cues in the servant's demeanor or in the quality of the drink itself. In some cases, the first drink was accompanied by a silent challenge, a test of obedience under pressure. Stories survive of lords who, upon receiving their morning drink, would suddenly command a difficult task or question the servant sharply, all before the sun had fully risen. For the servant, this could be a moment of life or death, as failure to respond correctly might result in disgrace or corporal punishment. This morning ritual also underscores the stark contrast between the Lord's power and the servant's vulnerability. While the Lord enjoyed privileges and command, the servant lived in a world of constant vigilance, where every action was scrutinized and every moment fraught with risk. The serving of the first drink was a daily reminder of this imbalance, a quiet but potent dance of dominance and submission, played out in the stillness before the day's noise and activity erupted. Moreover, this practice reveals much about the nature of medieval hospitality and care. Despite the apparent coldness and strict formality, the warming and careful preparation of the drink speak to an underlying awareness of human needs and comforts. Lords were not only rulers, but men who required sustenance and ritual to prepare for the burdens of leadership. The servants, trained from youth in these tasks, were custodians of this delicate balance, ensuring that each day began with the proper respect and ceremony. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, the serving of the Lord's first drink at 6:00 a.m. was far more than a mere convenience or routine chore. It was a charged, symbolic act that embodied the complexities of power, loyalty, and survival. It connected the intimate daily lives of individuals to the sweeping structures of feudal society, reminding all that beneath the walls of stone and banners of heraldry lay a world governed by ritual, expectation, and the unspoken rules of authority. As the servant withdrew silently after placing the cup, the Lord's gaze might linger on that small vessel, not just a container of warmed wine or ale, but a vessel of power, a test of obedience, and the first note in the symphony of control that composed a medieval day. And so, in that quiet moment, history whispered its truths. That every dawn in the castle was a performance of allegiance, a delicate exchange woven into the very fabric of life, where a cup could carry the weight of kingdoms and the fate of those who dared to serve. This is the profound reality of serving the Lord's first drink, an act so simple on its surface, yet infinitely complex beneath, echoing the intricate dance of medieval power, survival, and human connection that shaped an era. 6:30 a.m. Breakfast for the nobles, not the servants. At 6:30 in the morning, the grand halls of the manor came alive with the rich aromas of roast meats, freshly baked breads, and warm, spiced drinks. The cooks, skilled artisans of flavor and ceremony, moved with practiced precision, preparing a breakfast fit for nobility. Massive hearths blazed fiercely, casting flickering shadows on ornate tapestries and polished wooden tables set with gleaming goblets and silverware. The food was abundant, lavish, and meticulously arranged, a clear reflection of wealth and status. But just beyond this sumptuous scene, in the shadows and corners of the great hall, stood the servants. Their bodies were thin from long hours and scant meals, their faces often pale from fatigue and hunger. They remained silent, their eyes downcast, hands trembling ever so slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of their position. While the nobles feasted, the servants were left with scraps or dry bread eaten quickly and in secret, often before the morning tasks resumed. The disparity was stark and deliberate. The breakfast table was a stage where power was displayed not only through what was eaten, but who ate it. The lavish dishes served, succulent roasts glazed with honey, crusty breads scented with herbs, and rich spiced wines or ales, were symbols of privilege reserved exclusively for the noble class. The servants' hunger was invisible, dismissed as irrelevant to the rituals of status and hierarchy. In this era, food was more than sustenance. It was a social currency. The way meals were served, who sat where, and what was placed before each person spoke volumes about the rigid class divisions that structured daily life. Nobles indulged in delicacies that cost vast sums to procure, exotic spices imported from distant lands, rare cuts of meat, and freshly baked goods prepared by teams of specialized cooks. These meals were as much about reinforcing social order as they were about nourishment. For the servants, breakfast was a time of tension and restraint. Many waited anxiously nearby, tasked with refilling goblets and clearing plates with care and discretion. Their trembling hands betrayed the physical and emotional strain they endured. Long hours without proper rest, exhaustion, and constant hunger. Yet any sign of weakness or impatience could bring reprimand or worse. Silence was the rule, a survival mechanism in the presence of power. Historical records and diaries from the period reveal that servants often strategized to steal small bites or save morsels for themselves, knowing the day ahead demanded strength they were rarely afforded. They ate alone, quickly and with guilt, aware that their very survival depended on discretion. The servants' quarters, located far from the banquet rooms, were their refuge, but also a place of isolation where hunger and exhaustion were constant companions. The stark contrast between the tables, the opulence enjoyed by the few and the austerity imposed on the many, was a daily reminder of the unyielding social order. Nobles not only consumed food, but power itself, using every meal as a reaffirmation of their elevated status. Servants, meanwhile, consumed what little they could, their labor fueling the luxury of others while their own needs were sidelined. This early morning ritual of feasting and service encapsulated a world built on inequality, discipline, and control. It was a world where the nourishment of bodies and souls was divided sharply along lines of birth and privilege. The cooks and servants were unseen actors in this performance of status, their efforts hidden behind the glittering facades of nobility. Understanding this moment, the sumptuous breakfast at 6:30 a.m., is to understand how deeply entrenched and ritualized these divisions were. It invites us to reflect on the lived experience of those who sustained the grand households but never tasted their bounty. It reveals the hunger, not just of the body, but of dignity and recognition, that lay beneath the surface of these historical mornings. 7 a.m. Dressing the ladies of the court. At 7 o'clock sharp, as the first golden light filtered through the heavy curtains of the grand chambers, a different kind of labor began, one cloaked in elegance yet rooted in rigid discipline and relentless pressure. The ladies of the court, draped in silks and velvets, depended entirely on their attendants, the ladies' maids, who moved with practiced precision through the intricate and demanding ritual of dressing. This moment was not merely about adorning the noblewomen. It was a carefully choreographed performance of power, status, and control, where every detail mattered and every mistake could carry dire consequences. Ladies' maids were often young women who had trained for years in the art of service, their skill measured by their ability to anticipate needs and execute commands flawlessly. Their work began before the ladies themselves were fully awake. They assisted in bathing, carefully pouring water and helping wash the skin with cloths or sponges, ensuring cleanliness was maintained to the exacting standards of the court. Bathing was a private and vulnerable time, yet for the lady's maid, it was a moment demanding both discretion and efficiency. Following the bath came the daunting task of combing and styling hair, an elaborate process that could take hours depending on the latest fashions. Hair was a symbol of beauty and status, and the complexity of the styles reflected the wearer's rank and the social expectations placed upon her. Braids, curls, and jeweled pins were meticulously arranged, each strand smoothed and set. The slightest slip of a comb, a loose curl, or a misplaced pin was more than a mere error. It was a potential breach of etiquette and a risk to the maid's position. A dropped pin or an undone ribbon could be viewed as negligence, sometimes punished with harsh dismissal. Then came the arranging of gowns, layers upon layers of heavy fabrics, each garment intricately embroidered and stiffened with boning and petticoats. Corsets, tightened to uncomfortable extremes, shaped the body to the fashionable silhouette, restricting breathing and movement. The ladies' maids pulled, laced, and fastened with precise tension, aware that a corset too loose could be seen as a flaw, while too tight risked injury. The physical strain on the noblewomen was immense, and the maids bore witness to both the glamour and the discomfort that defined court life. This dressing ritual was a silent battlefield of control, where the maid's skill was constantly under scrutiny, and the noblewoman's appearance was a weapon wielded to command respect, influence, and sometimes fear. The pressure was relentless. Every fold, every clasp, every sparkle had to be perfect. Failure could mean public humiliation or the end of employment. Ladies' maids lived in the shadow of this anxiety, their futures hinging on their ability to navigate the demands of their patrons without error. Historically, the role of the lady's maid was one of paradox, both privileged and precarious. They had access to the private lives of the elite and sometimes wielded subtle influence through their intimate service, yet they remained firmly subservient, their own identities often erased beneath their duties. The strict etiquette of the time forbade them from displaying too much personality or independence, binding them in invisible chains as tight as the corsets they fastened. The physical environment of this early morning scene was itself a testament to the era's opulence and austerity. Heavy velvet drapes, gilded mirrors, carved wooden furniture, and the faint scent of lavender and rosewater mingled with the quiet tension of the room. Servants moved silently, shadows flickering by candlelight or early sunlight, each action choreographed as if in a delicate dance that balanced grace with exacting standards. In this moment, the seemingly effortless beauty and elegance of the court concealed the hard labor and constant vigilance required to maintain appearances. The noblewoman's radiant presence was inseparable from the maid's tireless, invisible work that shaped history by sustaining the social rituals that defined power and identity. Thus, the act of dressing the ladies of the court at 7 a.m. was far more than a daily routine. It was a crucible where service met artistry, where strength was disguised as gentleness, and where every small movement could ripple outward, shaping fates and fortunes. It offers us a window into a world where beauty was bought with pain, control was exercised in whispers and pins, and where survival depended on mastering the delicate balance between perfection and imperfection under the watchful eyes of tradition and authority. 7:30 a.m. Chamber sweeping and lice removal. At 7:30 in the morning, the castle stirred into a new phase of its daily ritual, chamber sweeping and the relentless battle against lice. This was a time when the servants, already wearied by pre-dawn duties, turned their attention to the personal spaces of the nobility, spaces where comfort and cleanliness were illusions maintained by relentless labor. The grand chambers, draped in rich fabrics and heavy tapestries, concealed beneath their opulence the ever-present threat of pests, particularly lice, which plagued medieval life with unyielding persistence. Bedding and carpets, those essential symbols of warmth and luxury, were carefully beaten outside in the castle's courtyard. This was no mere chore. It was a vital process to dislodge dust, dirt, and the microscopic enemies that hid within the fibers. Servants wielded heavy beaters and rods, rhythmically striking the mattresses and carpets until dust clouds rose into the cold morning air. This act was as much about survival as it was about presentation. In an age before regular bathing and modern hygiene, these beating sessions reduced the risk of infestation that could cause incessant itching, sores, and disease. Mattresses themselves were scrutinized with grim attention. To the untrained eye, a mattress was simply a place to rest, but to the vigilant servant, it was a potential breeding ground for lice. These tiny, blood-sucking parasites thrived in the warmth of bedding, moving stealthily through seams and stuffing, multiplying rapidly if left unchecked. The process of inspecting mattresses required sharp eyes and patience, a task often given to junior servants eager to prove their worth, but aware that any oversight could have severe consequences. Historical records from medieval households revealed the severity with which failure was treated in this domain. One notable incident tells of a servant who was harshly punished for failing to spot a single flea during the routine inspection. Such strict discipline underscored the importance placed on hygiene control in a world where disease could spread swiftly through the walls of the castle. The presence of lice was not merely a nuisance, it was a potential vector for plagues and infections that could threaten the health of the entire household, noble and servant alike. The battle against lice extended beyond mattresses to clothing and personal grooming. Servants assisted with the combing and washing of hair, employing fine-toothed combs to capture and remove these unwelcome guests. The constant vigilance required was exhausting, but essential. In a society that prized order and appearance, the presence of lice was seen as a disgrace and a sign of negligence. For the nobles, it was imperative to maintain a facade of cleanliness, not only for personal comfort, but also to project power and control over their domain. This relentless pursuit of cleanliness amidst filth reveals the paradoxes of medieval castle life. While the stone walls offered protection from external threats, inside the microcosm of daily existence, servants and nobles alike fought an invisible war against the parasites and diseases of their time. The tools were rudimentary, the methods often harsh, but the stakes were life and death. The morning ritual of chamber sweeping and lice removal was thus more than a mundane chore. It was a critical act of preservation. It maintained the delicate balance between comfort and decay, health and illness, dignity and degradation. Each sweep of the broom, each beat of the mattress, each careful inspection was a small victory in the ongoing struggle against the forces that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed world of the castle. In this light, the servant's role transcended mere labor. They were guardians of the household's health, unsung warriors battling pests that could undermine even the greatest of noble houses. Their vigilance was a cornerstone of medieval survival, a testament to the harsh realities hidden beneath the splendor of castle life. 8:00 a.m. Feeding the animals. Before yourself. At 8 o'clock in the morning, while the noble household was still stirring awake, an essential yet often overlooked ritual was underway: the feeding of the animals. Falcons, hounds, and horses, each vital to the daily life and status of the estate, awaited their morning sustenance with an expectation of precision and care. These creatures were more than mere animals. They were symbols of prestige, tools of hunting and war, and companions that embodied the power and privilege of their masters. The responsibility of feeding these animals typically fell to the stable boys and kennel hands, young servants who worked long hours in the cold, damp stables and kennels. Their duties were exacting and sometimes dangerous, demanding strength, attention, and resilience. The feeding ritual itself was carefully timed and structured. Falcons required fresh meat and meticulous attention. Hounds needed a balanced diet to maintain their vigor, and horses demanded both food and water to keep them strong for riding or labor. Yet, the feeding of animals always came before the servants themselves ate. This strict order underscored the hierarchy not only between master and servant, but also between human and animal within the household. The well-being of the animals was prioritized because they were essential assets, critical to hunting expeditions, transportation, and protection. A well-fed horse meant a swift and reliable steed. A healthy hound ensured success on the hunt, and a cared-for falcon was a status symbol that demonstrated the noble's refinement and power. In the cold morning air, stable boys would carry heavy buckets of water and feed, moving between stalls with practiced ease. But the work was far from gentle. The animals, while trained, were still wild at heart and could be unpredictable. Hounds, especially those bred for hunting and guarding, possessed sharp teeth and fierce temperaments. Injuries were common, yet often met with stoic silence. The story of a stable boy bitten by a hound illustrates the harsh reality of this environment. He bled through his chores, yet no one stopped to help. His pain and injury were secondary to the unyielding demands of duty and the social order that placed servants far below both animals and nobility. This disregard was not born from cruelty alone, but from a rigid system that viewed servants as expendable labor, their suffering invisible or irrelevant. The stable boy's injury, though serious, was overshadowed by the need to maintain the smooth functioning of the household. The relentless pace and strict hierarchy meant that mercy was often a luxury the lowest ranks could not afford. Such conditions fostered a culture of endurance, where injury and hardship were accepted as part of the daily grind. Feeding the animals before oneself also highlights the intertwined relationships between humans and animals in the medieval and early modern periods. These creatures were both tools and status symbols, living extensions of their master's identity and power. The health and behavior of a noble's hunting dogs or prized horses were reflections on the household's prestige. Neglecting them was unthinkable, while the servants who cared for them remained largely invisible. The process itself required knowledge and skill. Stable boys had to understand the dietary needs of different animals, monitor their behavior, and clean their living spaces. Feeding was not merely placing food in a trough. It involved observing the animals for signs of illness or distress, managing temperaments, and sometimes breaking up fights among jealous hounds. This laborious work was physically demanding and mentally taxing, especially under the constant pressure to perform flawlessly. Despite their hard work, these young servants had little recourse when injured or overworked. Their place in the household was precarious. Illness or injury could mean losing their position, and opportunities for advancement were rare. The lack of compassion for the injured stable boy is a stark reminder of the harsh realities faced by those at the bottom of the social ladder. Moreover, the feeding ritual was part of a larger morning routine that set the tone for the day. While nobles enjoyed leisurely breakfasts in warm halls, servants faced cold, arduous hours of labor before their own basic needs were met. This disparity emphasized the social divide, where privilege and power dictated even the timing of a meal. Understanding this moment, the feeding of the animals before the servants provides a window into the broader social and economic structures of the past. It reveals how status was maintained not only through wealth and power, but through daily rituals that reinforced hierarchy and control. The animals, cherished and protected, contrasted sharply with the vulnerability and invisibility of the servants who cared for them. This glimpse into the early morning routines of a noble estate uncovers a world where survival demanded endurance, obedience, and silent sacrifice. The stable boy's bleeding wound, ignored as he continued his chores, becomes a powerful symbol of the harshness endured by countless unseen individuals whose labor made aristocratic life possible. It reminds us that behind every symbol of power lies a complex web of human stories, stories of resilience, pain, and unacknowledged sacrifice that shaped history in ways often left untold. In reflecting on this, we recognize the layered realities of historical households, where privilege and hardship coexisted intimately, and the simple act of feeding animals before oneself speaks volumes about the social order, the value of life, and the human cost woven into the fabric of history. 9 a.m. The Lords leave for council. Cleanup begins. As the clock struck 9 in the morning, the Lords rose from their heavy oak chairs, the weight of strategy sessions lingering in the air like a dense fog. The Grand Hall, moments before alive with intense debate, now fell silent as the council disbanded, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. These meetings were not mere formalities. They shaped the fates of kingdoms, decided wars, and shifted alliances. Every word spoken was laced with power and intrigue, and every gesture watched with suspicion. But as the lords departed, leaving behind maps sprawled across tables and goblets half emptied of wine, the true work began, not by the nobility, but by those tasked with erasing the traces of the council's deliberations. The cleanup that followed was swift and meticulous. Tables were scrubbed clean, maps folded or rolled away, and the remnants of spilled wine wiped with practiced efficiency. This was no ordinary cleaning job. The servants, acutely aware of the delicacy of what they handled, moved with a blend of haste and caution. Their work went beyond tidying. It was an act of preservation and, sometimes, deception. In the shadowed corners of the castle, spies often masqueraded as cleaners, blending seamlessly into the flurry of activity. Their purpose was clear: to overhear whispered plans, to glean secrets from careless words, to capture the faintest hint of strategy that could be sold or wielded as power. These undercover agents were masters of subtlety. Cloaked in the guise of humble service, they carried with them sharp minds and keen ears. Their presence transformed the mundane task of cleanup into a battlefield of intelligence gathering. As they moved among the servants, their eyes scanned not just the room, but the reactions of those around them. Every sigh, every nervous glance, every hushed whisper was a potential clue. They listened for inconsistencies, gauged loyalties, and noted who seemed overly eager or unusually silent. The grand halls of medieval castles were not only places of governance, but arenas of espionage, where the act of wiping a table could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The maps themselves were invaluable artifacts. Crafted with painstaking detail, they represented the territories under the lord's control, the lands of rivals, and the front lines of conflict. Cleaning or removing these maps was a delicate operation. Leaving them out too long risked exposure to enemy spies, while folding them carelessly could damage vital information. Servants trained in the household understood the importance of discretion, often working under strict orders to safeguard these documents. The very fabric of political strategy was woven into parchment and ink, and its protection was paramount. Spilled wine, more than a mere mess, carried symbolic weight. In medieval symbolism, wine represented blood, life, and the sacred. A spill during council meetings could be interpreted as a bad omen or a sign of tension. Servants cleaned these stains swiftly, wiping away not only the physical evidence, but, metaphorically, the residue of conflict. This ritual of cleansing echoed the desire to start anew, to prepare the space for the next gathering where decisions would once again shape destinies. The presence of spies disguised as cleaners added a layer of paranoia and complexity to medieval politics. Trust was scarce in these environments. Lords had to constantly question the loyalty of those closest to them. The lines between servant and informant blurred, creating a web of secrecy and suspicion. For the servants who were genuine, this meant navigating a perilous path, serving faithfully while avoiding any hint of association with espionage. One misstep could result in accusations of treachery, imprisonment, or worse. This dynamic highlights the crucial role servants played beyond their visible duties. They were the silent witnesses of power, the keepers of secrets, and sometimes unwitting participants in the grand political games of the era. Their tasks, seemingly menial, were integral to the functioning of medieval governance. Cleaning after council was not simply about order, but about maintaining the fragile balance of knowledge and control. Furthermore, the cleanup process reveals much about the medieval mindset toward information. Unlike today's digital age, where data can be erased with a keystroke, medieval information was physical and vulnerable. Every spilled wine drop, every crumpled map, every overheard whisper mattered immensely. The act of cleaning was also an act of protecting information, ensuring that no trace remained for adversaries to exploit. In this light, the 9 a.m. cleanup after the Lord's departure was an essential ritual in the daily life of the castle. It underscored the ever-present interplay of power, loyalty, and survival. The grand halls that had witnessed heated debates were returned to order, but the invisible threads of espionage and intrigue remained taut beneath the surface, shaping the course of history in unseen ways. Thus, the story of those who cleaned after council meetings is one of quiet tension and hidden danger. It reminds us that in the world of medieval politics, even the simplest acts, wiping a table, folding a map, removing a stain, were fraught with meaning and consequence. Behind every polished surface lay a battlefield of secrets, where survival depended not only on strength, but on cunning, vigilance, and the silent art of listening. 10 a.m. laundry begins for the day. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the day's labor took on one of its most grueling forms: laundry. Far from the soothing hum of modern machines, this was a brutal, back-breaking task performed entirely by hand, demanding strength, endurance, and silence. Linen washing was an unforgiving rite of passage for servants, a chore that left physical scars as tangible as the social ones they bore. The process began with large basins or wooden tubs filled with cold water mixed with lye, a harsh, caustic substance derived from wood ash or quicklime. Lye was essential. It stripped away the dirt, grease, and sweat that had soaked into fine linens and garments worn daily by nobles. But it was also a chemical torment to the skin. Hands plunged repeatedly into this caustic mixture endured severe irritation. Fingernails, long subjected to the abrasive scrubbing on coarse fabrics, turned blackened from grime and chemical burns. The skin cracked and peeled, raw and sensitive, yet the servants had no choice but to continue. Gloves were unheard of, unavailable, and even if they existed, would have marked the wearer as weak or reluctant, a dangerous stigma in a hierarchy where obedience was prized above well-being. Every muscle was tested as servants scrubbed garments against rough washboards or rocks, kneeling for hours on hard stone floors beside rushing rivers or in damp laundry rooms. The coldness of the water bit deep, sapping body heat and adding physical misery to the already exhausting work. This relentless pounding and washing was repeated again and again until the linens gleamed, a mark of pride for the household, but a bitter symbol of the servants' toil. Complaints were forbidden. To grumble was to risk punishment, to invite accusations of laziness or insubordination. The social order demanded absolute submission, and servants learned to mask pain and fatigue behind stoic expressions. Diaries and accounts from the period recount stories of hands so damaged that tasks became nearly impossible, yet there was no respite. The laundry never stopped, as it was essential not only for cleanliness, but for upholding the noble family's reputation. Filthy or wrinkled linen was a stain, not just on clothing, but on honor. The emotional toll was profound. Laundry was a metaphor for the servant's existence, scrubbed raw, worn thin, and endlessly pressed into service. Their bodies were the first to show signs of hardship, and their health often suffered as a result. But the work had to be done with quiet diligence, out of sight, and without acknowledgement. Historically, laundry was a communal task, but one that isolated servants physically and socially. The laundry yard or riverside washing spot was a place of brutal labor, exposed to cold winds and public scrutiny, yet a rare setting where servants might exchange whispered conversations or fleeting moments of solidarity. Still, the work itself remained a constant reminder of their lowly station. By 10 in the morning, as nobles perhaps enjoyed leisure or study, the servants were submerged in this merciless routine. The linens they washed were woven with the invisible threads of hardship and endurance. The glow of freshly laundered sheets and garments was bought at the price of cracked hands and silent suffering. In reflecting on the daily ritual of laundry, we see the stark intersection of social hierarchy, labor, and human endurance. This seemingly mundane task exposes a deeper truth. The grandeur and comfort of the noble household were sustained by relentless toil, sacrifice, and a code of silence imposed upon those who served. It invites us to remember the unseen and unspoken struggles that shaped everyday life in history's grand estates. 11 a.m. Preparing the Great Hall for midday meal. At 11 o'clock in the morning, as the sun climbed steadily toward its zenith, the Great Hall, the beating heart of any noble household, became the center of a carefully orchestrated ritual. This vast chamber, with its towering beams and roaring hearths, was where power, hierarchy, and social order were displayed in full force, especially during the midday meal. Preparing this space was a monumental task, entrusted to the stewards and servants whose precision and obedience upheld the rigid codes that governed every aspect of aristocratic life. The long trestle tables, often constructed from heavy oak planks, had to be arranged meticulously in parallel rows to accommodate dozens, sometimes hundreds of diners. These tables bore the weight not only of food, but of centuries of social symbolism. Each setting was carefully planned and executed. Trenchers, thick slices of stale bread hardened to serve as plates, were placed before every seat, alongside pewter or wooden cups, and an array of cutlery that included knives, spoons, and sometimes forks, though the latter were a rare luxury. The trenchers absorbed juices and sauces, and after the meal they were either consumed or given to the poor, symbolizing a cycle of sustenance and charity that reinforced the social fabric. Seats were arranged with an almost religious reverence to rank and precedence. The head of the household and his family claimed the most honored places, closest to the high dais or the fire, while guests of varying importance filled the seats according to strict protocol. The servants responsible for this arrangement knew well that any misplacement could lead to chaos, not just socially, but physically. Noble egos were fragile, and a slight or error in seating was interpreted as a grave insult, capable of sparking conflict or displeasure severe enough to warrant punishment. For the servants, the task was high stakes and exacting. The slightest mistake, a trencher placed too close or too far, a goblet inverted, a seat assigned out of order, could provoke lashings or other brutal reprimands. The overseers, often stern and unforgiving, maintained strict vigilance, ready to enforce discipline at a moment's notice. The physical toll on the servants was immense, hours spent bending, lifting, and arranging under the oppressive weight of expectation, all while remaining invisible to the nobles who would soon consume the fruits of their labor. Beyond mere functionality, the Great Hall's midday meal was a theatrical event where food and seating became a language of power. The layout communicated who held influence and who was subordinate. Every gesture and arrangement reinforced the rigid feudal hierarchy that defined the era. The servants were both custodians and enforcers of this social order, ensuring that the visual spectacle matched the political realities of rank and privilege. The air in the Great Hall before the meal was thick with anticipation, dust motes dancing in shafts of light that pierced the stained glass windows. The scent of polished wood mingled with the faint aroma of herbs stored nearby, and the quiet footsteps of servants echoed in the vast space, their movements choreographed with precision and care. This moment, just before the doors opened to the lords, ladies, and their retinues, was charged with tension, a silent test of skill, endurance, and the unyielding demands of a world where even the smallest error could bring severe consequences. Historically, the role of preparing the Great Hall was a microcosm of the servants' existence, laborious, undervalued, and fraught with peril. Their hands set the stage for displays of opulence and authority, yet they remained unseen, shadows behind the grandeur. The midday meal itself was a vital ritual, sustaining not just bodies, but the intricate social contracts that held feudal society together. Understanding the preparation of the Great Hall at 11 o'clock reveals the hidden machinery behind noble life, a world where status was built on discipline, where every trencher and chair was a piece in the puzzle of power, and where servants walked a razor's edge between duty and danger. It is a vivid testament to the harsh realities endured by those whose toil was the invisible foundation beneath the lavish surface of aristocratic existence. 12 p.m. Midday meal for nobles begins. At the stroke of noon, the castle's grand hall came alive with an air of solemnity and silent precision as the midday meal for the nobles commenced. This was a moment steeped in ritual and hierarchy, where every gesture, every breath, every movement was measured with unyielding discipline. The servants, trained to embody quiet vigilance, stood motionless like statues along the walls and beside the long, polished tables, their eyes sharp and attentive, their hands folded or poised, but never restless. Their presence was simultaneously invisible and indispensable, ready to respond instantly, yet never intruding on the noble feast unfolding before them. In these moments, the nobles occupied a world apart, insulated by their status and surrounded by luxury. Yet, beneath the surface of opulence lay ever-present dangers, chief among them, the threat of poisoning. Poison was a weapon of intrigue and treachery, a constant specter in the courts of medieval power where political rivalries simmered beneath courteous smiles. To guard against this silent peril, a tradition had evolved, the tasting of food by servants before it reached the lords and ladies. This practice was not a mere formality, but a serious duty fraught with risk. Designated servants, often the most trusted and experienced, took on the grim role of food tasters. Before any dish was served, they sampled morsels carefully, scrutinizing the flavors and textures for anything suspicious. A bitter aftertaste, an unusual smell, or a subtle change in texture could signal the presence of poison. The stakes were high. One mistake could mean death. These tasters faced the possibility of falling victim to malicious plots, and their courage was both a shield and a sacrifice, guarding the lives of their masters through vigilance and often quiet suffering. This ritual underscored the tense undercurrents of medieval court life, where power was as fragile as it was absolute. Food, a symbol of sustenance and celebration, doubled as a battlefield for survival. The silence of the servants, standing motionless as the nobles ate, was not just about etiquette. It was a testament to the weight of responsibility resting on their shoulders. Their eyes watched every bite, every swallow, every glance, prepared to react at a moment's notice. Moreover, the midday meal itself was a spectacle of wealth and status. The tables groaned beneath platters of roasted meats, fresh bread, cheeses, fruits, and spiced delicacies imported from distant lands. Each dish was carefully prepared to impress and demonstrate the noble household's prosperity. Yet, for the servants, the meal was a reminder of their place, ever present but unseen, moving only at command, their lives devoted to the seamless orchestration of this daily ritual. The role of these servants extended beyond mere physical tasks. They were the custodians of trust and safety in a world where appearances masked the precarious balance of power. Their vigilance ensured that the feast proceeded without incident, that the nobles could dine in relative security amid the ever-present shadows of suspicion. Thus, the midday meal was more than nourishment. It was a stage where social hierarchies played out in silence and stillness, where the unseen guardians bore risks to protect the powerful, and where every moment was charged with the unspoken understanding that survival depended on discretion, discipline, and the quiet bravery of those who served. 1. p.m. Leftovers for lower servants. At exactly 1 p.m., as the great halls of the manor echoed with the clatter of fine china being cleared and the murmurs of satisfied nobles fading into the afternoon, a much different scene played out in the dim, shadowed recesses of the household, the distribution of leftovers to the lower servants. This was a ritual rife with unspoken truths about class, survival, and the stark inequalities that defined daily life behind the walls of aristocratic power. While the lords and ladies enjoyed their rich midday meals, surrounded by ornate tapestries and the warmth of the sunlit dining chambers, the servants waited patiently and often hungrily in the back halls, the servants' quarters, or the scullery. Their sustenance depended on the remnants of their masters' feasts, a practice that underscored the rigid social hierarchy entrenched in every corner of the manor. The food allotted to them was not a carefully prepared portion, but the scraps: moldy bread, half-chewed meats, and cold broth. The detritus of luxury, tossed almost carelessly from tables above. These scraps, often spoiled or barely edible, were a cruel reminder of the gulf between those who lived in comfort and those who labored ceaselessly to maintain that comfort. Moldy bread was not a rarity. Bread was a staple, yet what was left for servants was frequently stale or rotting, risking illness and discomfort. The half-chewed meats, bones gnawed by nobles and their guests, were given to the servants as a last resort, a grim testament to the expendability assigned to them. Cold broth, sometimes diluted and thin, served as the watery gruel that barely filled hungry stomachs. This allocation of leftovers was a practical solution for the household, minimizing waste while reinforcing the social order. It allowed nobles to maintain their lavish lifestyle without concern for the well-being of those who supported it. For the servants, it was a daily negotiation between hunger and dignity, a forced acceptance of their position in the hierarchy. Eating the scraps of others was not just about nourishment, but survival, and it shaped the harsh realities of servant life in profound ways. The conditions under which these leftovers were consumed were far from pleasant. Servants often gathered in cramped, poorly ventilated back halls or cold kitchens, surrounded by the smells of cooking fires and discarded refuse. The contrast between these spaces and the sumptuous dining rooms above could not have been starker. Privacy was scarce, and the hurried nature of their meals left little time for rest or digestion before returning to their endless tasks. Eating these leftovers also exposed servants to health risks. Moldy bread could lead to digestive problems, and the consumption of bones or scraps raised fears of injury or infection. Yet, options were limited, and for many servants, this was the only meal they could count on during a long workday. Their bodies endured the physical toll of labor with little nourishment, sustained by resilience and the necessity of survival. This moment in the day reveals much about the broader economic and social systems of the time. The circulation of food scraps from the upper to the lower classes was emblematic of the resource distribution that maintained aristocratic privilege. It was a visible manifestation of inequality, where waste for one was sustenance for another. The practice also reinforced servant subservience, reminding them of their place and dependence on the nobility's generosity, or lack thereof. In some households, there might have been small acts of kindness, a lord or lady discreetly providing better scraps, or a sympathetic cook setting aside a warm meal for favored servants, but such exceptions were rare and often hidden beneath layers of strict social etiquette. The norm remained a daily ration of leftovers that symbolized not just food scarcity, but social scarcity, a deprivation of dignity, comfort, and agency. Understanding this harsh reality provides insight into the lived experience of servants, people whose lives were entwined with those they served yet separated by invisible yet unbreakable barriers. The ritual of receiving and consuming leftovers was more than a simple meal. It was a daily reaffirmation of power dynamics, survival strategies, and the silent endurance of those who sustained the machinery of aristocratic life. By examining this routine, we honor the resilience of the countless servants who navigated hunger and hardship with quiet strength, whose stories often remain overshadowed by the grandeur of the world they helped uphold. Their existence, defined in part by the scraps they ate, invites us to reflect on history's hidden layers, the human cost behind privilege, and the enduring complexity of social structures that shaped the past and continue to echo into the present. 2 p.m. Chamber pot duty. At precisely 2 p.m., as the midday meal settled into the veins of the castle's sprawling chambers, a delicate and indispensable task quietly unfolded: the chamber pot duty. This was no mere chore, but a crucial ritual embedded deep within the fabric of medieval domestic life, one charged with both practical necessity and social peril. The weight of aristocratic indulgence often meant that nobles, after feasting upon rich meats, heavy breads, and spiced wines, required the assistance of servants to discreetly manage their bodily needs. The chamber pot, an unassuming vessel, became a silent witness to the intimate and vulnerable moments hidden behind the grandeur of courtly life. The role of the servant assigned to chamber pot duty was one of profound discretion and unwavering precision. Moving through dimly lit corridors and private chambers, these attendants carried their burdens with a blend of reverence and urgency. The chamber pot itself was often made of polished metal or sturdy ceramic, designed to contain the noble's waste without spilling a hint of its contents. Yet, despite its simple appearance, the responsibility it bore was immense. Any mishap, a spill, an exposed odor, or a delay could ignite swift and severe repercussions. Medieval courts were unforgiving arenas where shame was weaponized, and the slightest blemish on a servant's performance could lead to public humiliation, loss of favor, or harsher punishments. The environment in which chamber pot duty was performed was steeped in social hierarchy and unspoken rules. Nobles, accustomed to the luxury and privacy their status afforded, relied on the utmost confidentiality from their servants. The attendant was expected to be invisible, moving silently and efficiently, anticipating needs before they were voiced. Eye contact was avoided. Words were minimized. The servant's presence was tolerated only insofar as it maintained the dignity of the lord or lady. This delicate dance underscored the rigid power dynamics that permeated medieval society, where intimacy was cloaked in secrecy and service was both an honor and a burden. The physical challenges of this duty were significant. Navigating narrow staircases, uneven stone floors, and labyrinthine corridors while balancing a filled chamber pot demanded skill and steady nerves. The risk of accidents loomed constantly. A single spill could mar the pristine tapestries or wooden floors of the castle, leaving not only a foul stain, but an indelible mark of failure. The resulting odor, if not swiftly and thoroughly managed, could betray the servant's presence and shatter the illusion of noble grace. Thus, servants trained extensively in swift cleaning methods and odor control, using straw, vinegar, and other contemporary remedies to mask unpleasant smells. Historically, the importance of such duties is reflected in the detailed household accounts and manuals from the medieval period, which often itemize the responsibilities and expectations placed on servants. These texts reveal that chamber pot duty was assigned only to those trusted implicitly, for the consequences of failure extended beyond mere embarrassment. In a society where reputation was everything, a servant who allowed a chamber pot incident to become public knowledge risked being ostracized or dismissed. The psychological weight of this knowledge added an invisible layer of pressure to an already demanding role. Beyond the immediate practicalities, chamber pot duty offers a stark glimpse into the human realities beneath the polished veneer of medieval nobility. The necessity of such care highlights the frailty and dependence of even the most powerful individuals. Despite their authority and wealth, lords and ladies were subject to the same bodily functions as their servants. The ritual of managing these functions through intermediaries speaks to a complex relationship of power, dignity, and vulnerability. Moreover, this duty reveals the often overlooked labor that sustained medieval courts. While history frequently celebrates battles, politics, and grand ceremonies, the survival and daily comfort of nobility depended on countless unseen acts of service. Chamber pot duty was among the most intimate and humbling of these, requiring servants to suppress any personal revulsion or discomfort to fulfill their obligations flawlessly. The threat of public shaming for any mistake further illustrates the harsh social realities of the time. Medieval society was rigidly stratified, and servants occupied the lowest rungs. Mistakes were not forgiven easily. Public humiliation could take many forms, from verbal reprimands shouted across the hall to physical punishments enacted before other members of the household. This culture of discipline reinforced the power imbalance and served as a constant reminder of the servant's place. Yet, despite these dangers, chamber pot duty was an essential aspect of court life, carried out daily with stoic resolve. It symbolized the complex intersection of servitude, dignity, and survival. The servant's success in this task upheld the noble's image of unblemished refinement, while failure exposed the fragile human truths hidden beneath layers of opulence. In reflecting on this ritual, we are reminded that history is not only shaped by kings and battles, but also by the quiet, unrecognized labors of those who served behind the scenes. The story of chamber pot duty is a testament to the invisible hands that maintained medieval society, balancing the demands of dignity and necessity in a world defined by hierarchy and survival. 3 p.m. Sweeping the courtyard or cleaning the chapel. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the bustle of the day's main activities had momentarily waned, the servants were tasked with a quieter, yet no less demanding responsibility, sweeping the courtyard or cleaning the chapel. These hours of relative stillness masked some of the most grueling labor in the estate, performed not in haste but with exacting thoroughness, precision, and a constant awareness of the ever-watchful eyes that measured their worth through the spotless surfaces they left behind. The courtyard, often paved with worn stone slabs, was a hub of activity throughout the day. Horses trod here, mud tracked in from the fields, dirt from heavy footfalls accumulated, and the occasional litter from birds or wind marred the otherwise austere setting. Yet during the quiet hours, it was the servant's duty to restore this central space to a semblance of order and cleanliness. Their brooms were not the lightweight brushes we imagine today, but hefty bundles of twigs or coarse straw tied firmly to long wooden handles. Sweeping was a physically taxing process, requiring repetitive, rhythmic motions that wore down the muscles of the arms and back, all while bending or stooping to reach every crevice between stones. Beyond the general dirt and dust, the courtyard bore evidence of nature's less pleasant gifts. Bird droppings scattered across the stones, stubborn in both smell and stain. These had to be painstakingly removed using scrapers or stiff brushes, sometimes combined with sand or ash to scour the surfaces. Failure to clear such blemishes was considered a serious dereliction, as the courtyard was a prominent space viewed by nobles and guests alike. It had to reflect order and control, symbolizing the power and prestige of the household. Meanwhile, cleaning the chapel demanded a reverence and delicacy that stood in stark contrast to the brute labor of the courtyard. The stone floors here were often ancient and sacred, worn smooth by generations of worshippers' feet. Candle wax, dripped over hours from countless flickering flames, hardened into stubborn patches that marred the pristine stone. Scraping these deposits required patience, steady hands, and a careful touch lest the stone itself be damaged. Every inch of the floor, every step, was polished with rags or cloths until it shone, a mirror reflecting flickering candlelight and the stained glass windows that cast kaleidoscopic colors onto the cold surfaces. This cleaning was not merely functional, but a ritual in itself, maintaining the sanctity and dignity of the space where prayers were whispered and vows taken. The chapel's condition was a reflection of the household's piety and discipline, and any lapse was not only a personal failure, but a spiritual blemish. The work during these quiet hours was marked by a solitude often broken only by the faint scrape of scrapers, the rustle of brooms, or the occasional hushed exchange between servants. The silence was heavy, underscored by the knowledge that their labor would soon be assessed, their worth judged by the gleam of the floors and the absence of dirt or imperfection. In a world where visibility often meant vulnerability, the spotless courtyard and chapel stood as silent testimonials to the unseen efforts of those who labored in the background. Historically, such cleaning tasks were emblematic of the servant's existence, constant, unglamorous, and essential. Their work upheld not only the physical environment, but also the social and spiritual order that defined noble life. The intense scrutiny under which they operated, combined with the physical toll of bending, scraping, and polishing, made these hours a test of endurance and humility. To envision the scene at 3 o'clock is to recognize the complex dynamics of power, duty, and resilience. The courtyard and chapel, spaces so central to the daily rhythms of the estate, depended on the sweat and vigilance of those who, though often invisible, were indispensable. Their labor transformed grime into dignity, disorder into decorum, and neglect into respect, reminding us that the grandeur of history's great houses was built on foundations of painstaking, unacknowledged toil. 4 p.m. Assisting with royal outings or hunts. At 4 in the afternoon, the castle's daily rhythm shifted from the quiet, controlled indoor spaces to the wild and unpredictable outdoors as nobles prepared for their royal outings or hunts. These excursions were more than mere sport. They were demonstrations of power, skill, and privilege, entwined with deep social and political significance. For the servants who accompanied them, however, these ventures into the forests were grueling ordeals, tests of endurance and obedience that rarely earned gratitude or recognition. The servants assigned to these outings bore heavy burdens. They carried game bags filled with freshly hunted quarry, quivers bristling with arrows, and the resonant hunting horns that signaled the noble party's presence deep within the woods. Their task was to facilitate the hunt, to anticipate the needs of their masters, and to remain ever vigilant amid the unpredictable dangers of the wild. The forest was a harsh environment. Uneven ground, tangled underbrush, biting insects, and the constant threat of injury. Many servants returned with bruises, cuts, or worse, strained muscles and broken backs from hauling gear and game through unforgiving terrain. Despite their indispensable role, these servants often received no thanks. The nobility's attention was focused on the thrill of the chase, the glory of the kill, and the social theater that surrounded the hunt. Servants were expected to be invisible facilitators, their suffering a silent undercurrent to the nobles' leisure. Historical accounts suggest that while the nobles boasted of their prowess and dominance over nature, the servants bore the physical toll, their pain and fatigue largely ignored. The hunt itself was a complex affair, steeped in ritual and symbolism. It was a rare moment when the rigid hierarchies of the castle were temporarily extended into the wild, with nobles asserting control over untamed lands and creatures. Servants, though low in status, had to navigate this hierarchy carefully, balancing obedience with survival. Their movements were choreographed to support the hunt's success, readying weapons, tracking wounded animals, and carrying heavy loads back to the castle. These outings revealed the stark contrasts of medieval life, the luxury and leisure of the ruling class set against the hardship and invisibility of those who served. The forest became a theater of both glory and hardship, where the nobility's power was displayed through sport, while servants endured physical and emotional strain, their contributions essential yet unacknowledged. In this light, the royal outing was more than a pastime. It was a microcosm of medieval society's inequalities, a reminder that behind every noble triumph stood countless unpaid labors and unspoken sacrifices. The broken backs of the servants echoed the heavy weight of a social order that prized status above empathy, leisure above labor, and spectacle above human dignity. 5 p.m. Repacking and replacing garments. At 5 p.m., as the day began to wane and shadows stretched long across the manor's stone floors, a meticulous and essential ritual unfolded within the servants' quarters and chambers, the repacking and replacing of garments. This daily practice, often unnoticed by the nobles who donned the clothes, was a cornerstone of the household's rhythm, a blend of care, discipline, and silent service that maintained appearances and upheld status. The clothing of the nobility was more than mere fabric. It was a living emblem of wealth, power, and refinement. Each garment was crafted from costly materials, velvet, silk, fine wool, embroidered with intricate patterns or adorned with delicate lace and jewels. Such attire required constant attention to preserve its appearance, lest the noble's stature be diminished by a wrinkle, a stain, or the faintest scent of neglect. The servants assigned to this task moved with practiced precision. Clothes were carefully refolded, smoothed by skilled hands to erase the day's creases. Special perfumed sachets were often placed between folds, imparting a faint, pleasing aroma that masked the mustiness of storage rooms and the lingering odors of the day. This fragrance was more than a simple luxury. It was a deliberate statement of cleanliness and distinction, a subtle yet potent signifier of status in a world where scent mattered. Boots and shoes, equally important to the noble's image, were scrupulously scraped and cleaned. Dirt and mud from rides across fields or hunts had to be removed painstakingly, restoring the leather to its polished shine. This care extended beyond aesthetics. Well-maintained footwear ensured comfort and readiness, essential for the often unpredictable demands of noble life. Yet, perhaps the most demanding part of this ritual was the treatment of blood-stained hunting gear. Hunting was a favored pastime and a symbol of aristocratic privilege, but it came with messy consequences. The servants charged with laundering and scrubbing this equipment faced arduous labor. Blood and grime from the chase clung stubbornly to fabric and leather, requiring vigorous hand scrubbing with brushes, water, and soap made from animal fats or herbs. This task was not only physically exhausting, but also emotionally taxing, as the stains were stark reminders of violence and death inherent in noble leisure. The scrubbing of hunting gear was conducted in cold, damp chambers or outdoor wash areas, where servants worked long after the noble family had retired for the evening. Their efforts ensured that the next day's garments and equipment were pristine and ready for display or use, maintaining the seamless illusion of effortless nobility. This ritual also reveals the unseen labor behind aristocratic life, the countless hours devoted to maintaining an image of perfection and privilege. Every fold smoothed, every scent applied, and every stain removed was a testament to the servant's skill and dedication, yet it was a labor performed largely without acknowledgement or gratitude. Moreover, the repacking and replacing of garments reinforced the strict social hierarchy. The noble's outward elegance depended entirely on the invisible work of the servants, who themselves wore plain, often worn clothing and faced their own daily struggles. Their role demanded humility and absolute discretion, as any hint of dissatisfaction or fatigue could result in reprimand or dismissal. The ritual marked a transition in the household's daily cycle, from the active bustle of daylight chores to the quieter preparations for evening repose. It was a time when servants, though still laboring, could take a moment to reflect on the day's challenges and the continuous demands of their service. In essence, the 5 p.m. routine of repacking and replacing garments encapsulates the intricate web of appearance, power, and labor that defined noble households. It illustrates how social status was maintained not only through wealth and privilege, but through the relentless, unseen work of those who preserved the facades of grandeur. By delving into this practice, we uncover the layered realities of historical life, where elegance was a fragile construct upheld by sweat, skill, and silent sacrifice. The clean folds, fragrant sachets, and polished boots stand as enduring symbols of a world where appearances were paramount, and the hands that sustained them remained forever in the shadows. 6 p.m. Dinner preparations begin again. As evening approached and the clock struck 6, the castle's kitchen erupted into a chaotic inferno of activity, a realm where fire, iron, and flesh converged in a brutal dance of survival and service. Dinner preparations began anew, but unlike the serene and orderly images often associated with noble feasts, the reality was far grittier and more perilous. The kitchen was a crucible of heat and noise, where shouts of command cut through the thick smoke rising from roaring hearths, and the air hung heavy with the pungent aroma of roasting meat. In this tempest of culinary chaos, the kitchen staff operated with frantic urgency and sharp precision. Large iron spits, glowing red-hot, were the instruments of both nourishment and danger. Rotating slowly over blazing fires, these spits bore whole animals, pigs, oxen, game birds, slowly cooking their flesh to tender perfection. Handling these monstrous rods of searing metal required not only strength, but a keen awareness of every movement, for a moment's inattention could result in catastrophic injury. Such was the case with one unfortunate cook's assistant, whose story survived in whispered warnings and grim anecdotes passed down through generations. Amid the clamorous din of clattering pots and roaring flames, the assistant's hand was caught in the unforgiving machinery of the spit roast. The metal's relentless rotation, combined with the assistant's proximity and haste, led to a horrific accident: the loss of a hand. This injury was not just a personal tragedy, but a stark testament to the dangers embedded in medieval culinary labor. The accident's aftermath was a somber reminder to all who labored in the kitchen's fiery heart. Medical knowledge was rudimentary. Treatments for such wounds were limited and often cruel, with high risks of infection and lasting disability. The injured assistant's life would be irrevocably changed, his duties curtailed, and his future uncertain in a world where physical ability dictated one's place and worth. This harsh reality underscored the brutal conditions under which medieval kitchens operated. Beyond the physical dangers, the kitchen was a place of relentless noise and stress. Orders were shouted across the heat and clamor. "Turn the spit! More salt! Watch the fire!" Each command crucial to the timing and success of the evening feast. The cooks, often skilled artisans in their own right, managed teams of assistants, apprentices, and laborers, all under pressure to deliver sumptuous meals befitting the lord's status. The cacophony was both a soundtrack of survival and a test of endurance. Smoke billowed relentlessly from the open hearths and chimneys, mixing with the sharp scent of sizzling fat and burning herbs. This thick haze obscured vision and irritated lungs, yet no one could pause or complain. The kitchen was an engine of the household, fueling the social rituals that reinforced power and hierarchy. Failure to meet the exacting standards of taste, timing, or presentation could invite not only shame, but punishment. In this context, every aspect of kitchen work demanded respect and vigilance. The handling of hot iron, in particular, was fraught with peril. Spit roasts could weigh hundreds of pounds, their metal rods searingly hot to the touch. Workers had to manipulate them with long poles and hooks, coordinating carefully to avoid contact. Yet accidents were common, a fact tacitly acknowledged in surviving records and oral traditions. The loss of a hand, while shocking, was not unprecedented. This brutal environment challenges modern romanticized notions of medieval feasts. Behind the gleaming tables and elegant banquets lay a world of hardship, danger, and relentless labor. The kitchen staff's sacrifices were the unseen foundation upon which noble indulgence rested. Their sweat, skill, and sometimes blood made possible the lavish displays of power and wealth. The 6 o'clock dinner preparations encapsulate the tension between grandeur and grit, pleasure and pain. The fiery chaos of the kitchen stands as a testament to the human cost hidden behind every sumptuous meal. The story of the cook's assistant who lost a hand is a poignant emblem of this reality, a vivid reminder that in medieval times, survival and service were inseparable, often at a brutal price. Thus, as the smoke rose and the spits turned, the castle's heartbeat pulsed with urgency and danger. The kitchen was not just a place of food, but a crucible where lives were shaped, tested, and sometimes broken. In every flicker of flame and clang of iron, the echoes of those who toiled and suffered still resound, inviting us to glimpse the harsh truths beneath the surface of medieval opulence. 7 p.m. Torch lighting throughout the castle. At 7 p.m. sharp, the castle transformed. The fading daylight surrendered to a labyrinth of shadows and flickering firelight as dozens of wall torches and candelabras were painstakingly lit. This was not merely a functional act, it was a ritual steeped in symbolism, superstition, and a complex social hierarchy that revealed much about medieval life behind the stone walls. The responsibility fell on the lighting boy, usually a young servant whose role was critical yet perilous. As dusk deepened into night, his small torch became the beacon that revived the castle's hearths of flame, illuminating the corridors, chambers, and great halls where nobility conducted their lives and intrigues. Lighting the torches was an art and a science. The materials mattered immensely. Pitch, resin, and various tars were used to ensure a steady burn, while the positioning of sconces and candelabras was carefully planned to maximize light without choking the stone with smoke. The castle's architects and stewards understood that firelight shaped the very atmosphere. Too little, and the space became a den of menace. Too much, and the flames could consume precious woodwork or delicate tapestries. The lighting boy's skill lay in navigating these dangers, coaxing flames alive, keeping them steady, and knowing which torches to rekindle first to avoid plunging the castle into darkness. But the stakes went far beyond the practical. In medieval superstition, a torch guttering out prematurely was a bad omen. It was thought to portend disaster, betrayal, or death within the castle's walls. The lighting boy, standing in the dim corridors with his fragile flame, bore the brunt of blame for any such misfortune. If a torch sputtered or died, accusations of negligence or worse could follow. The boy's hands had to be steady, his attention absolute, for a moment's lapse could invite suspicion, punishment, or disgrace. His role was both vital and precarious, emblematic of the fragile balance of power and belief that governed the castle's hierarchy. This nightly ritual also reflected the broader medieval worldview where light and darkness were powerful metaphors. Light symbolized order, knowledge, and divine presence. Darkness evoked chaos, ignorance, and evil. In a time before electric illumination, fire was the conduit through which these forces were mediated. The lighting of torches was therefore an act of reclaiming the castle from the encroaching night, a collective assertion of control over the unknown and the unseen. It reinforced social order. Nobles basked in the glow, servants moved silently in shadows, and the lighting boy's task was a tangible link in this dynamic. Fire itself was deeply symbolic in medieval culture. It was associated with purification, protection, and life force. Many castles had chaplains or priests who might bless the fires or the lighting ritual to ward off evil spirits. The flickering flames could be seen as tiny battles against the darkness that lurked both outside and within human hearts. Stories and folklore abounded with tales of torches guiding lost souls or warning of approaching danger. Thus, the simple act of lighting a torch was imbued with layers of meaning, blending the sacred and the secular. Practically, the lighting boy's evening routine began well before 7 p.m. Often, he had to prepare his materials, cloth soaked in pitch, bundles of twigs, or special wick preparations. Moving quietly through cold corridors, he would touch each sconce with a delicate flame, watching carefully for any that refused to catch or burned too briefly. The air was thick with smoke and heat, mingled with the scents of old stone, melting wax, and burning resin. The boy had to memorize every torch's location and condition. No torch could be left unlit, no shadow unattended. The social implications for the lighting boy were significant. Though a low-ranking servant, he held a role that could affect the entire castle's well-being and reputation. In some castles, lighting boys came from families bound to servitude, passing their duties down through generations. Their performance was scrutinized by overseers and sometimes by nobles themselves. In superstitious environments, a failed torch might lead to disciplinary action or be interpreted as a sign of the boy's ill favor with fate or the household gods. Conversely, a successful lighting bolstered the boy's standing, however modest. This ritual also reveals the medieval approach to risk and uncertainty. Without modern lighting or fire safety, the threat of accidental fires was constant. Lighting 100 or more torches in a stone castle full of tapestries, wooden beams, and oil lamps was dangerous work. Many castles had rules and procedures to minimize risk. Fires were lit slowly, torches positioned away from flammable materials, and servants ready with buckets of water or sand. Yet, despite these precautions, conflagrations were feared. The lighting boy's task thus embodied the tension between harnessing fire's light and controlling its destructive power. Furthermore, this ritual was a nightly signal marking the transition from day's labor to night's vigilance. As torches glowed, guards took their posts, servants settled into their evening duties or rest, and lords prepared for council or leisure by firelight. The castle's pulse changed with the lighting. What was once a place of bustling activity shifted into a fortress of watchfulness and mystery. The lighting boy, with his small torch, was the unsung catalyst of this transformation. In literature and historical records, we see echoes of this tradition. Chroniclers mention the lighting of great halls and chapels as moments of communal gathering and solemnity. Sometimes the flicker of a dying torch was a narrative device signaling betrayal or impending doom. The physicality of the lighting, cold hands gripping warm flames, the nervous glances cast by servants, the hush of anticipation, captures the fragile dance between human effort and fate's caprice. To modern eyes, the lighting boy's role might seem simple, yet in medieval times it was complex and charged with meaning. It encapsulated the interplay of survival, superstition, social order, and human fragility. It reminds us that behind the imposing stone walls and grand feasts lay countless small acts of devotion and danger, each flame a testament to the precariousness of life in a world balanced between light and dark. Thus, the torch lighting at 7 p.m. was far more than a mechanical routine. It was a nightly ritual that bound together the castle's inhabitants in a shared, yet unequal struggle to illuminate their world against shadows both literal and metaphorical. The flickering flames were silent witnesses to history, tragedy, and survival, held steady by the hands of a young servant whose careful breath and unwavering focus kept the castle alive, one torch at a time. When 8 p.m. Evening feast for the nobles. At 8 o'clock in the evening, as twilight deepened into a velvet night, and the great halls glowed with flickering candlelight and roaring hearth fires, the household prepared for one of the day's most demanding and perilous moments, the evening feast for the nobles. This event was not simply a meal. It was a grand spectacle of wealth, power, and social theater, where every detail was meticulously managed by the servants who moved behind the scenes with the precision of performers in a high-stakes drama. The feast was a sensory overload of rich aromas, lavish dishes, and flowing wine. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh-baked breads, exotic spices, and sweetmeats imported from distant lands. Silver goblets sparkled with fine vintages, while minstrels or jesters provided entertainment that ranged from haunting melodies to boisterous dance. The nobles, draped in silk and velvet, expected nothing less than perfection, and the pressure on the servants was immense. In this charged atmosphere, the servants juggled multiple roles simultaneously. Waiters bore heavy trays loaded with steaming platters and delicate glasses, weaving through the crowded hall with careful steps to avoid collision or spills. The balance and speed required were extraordinary. One misstep could send food crashing to the floor, igniting the wrath of the nobles and overseers alike. For many young servants, the evening feast was their ultimate test of composure and skill. But the duties extended beyond mere serving. Some servants were expected to dance or sing while performing their tasks, adding a layer of performance that heightened both the spectacle and the risk. Imagine balancing a tray brimming with wine goblets in one hand while gracefully moving to the rhythm of music, or launching into song with a voice trembling beneath the scrutiny of the court. This blend of artistry and labor demanded not only physical dexterity, but also mental fortitude. Any lapse could shatter the illusion of effortless grandeur. The consequences of failure were swift and severe. A single spilled tray, a dropped glass, or a missed beat could cost a servant their position instantly. Such was the case of one young boy whose career ended abruptly the moment a tray of wine tipped and scattered across the polished floor. In a world where appearances mattered above all, accidents were not seen as human error, but as unforgivable incompetence. Dismissal, often without ceremony or chance for redemption, was a harsh reminder of the precariousness of life in service. Historically, the evening feast encapsulated the extremes of servant life, the blending of physical exhaustion, emotional strain, and social invisibility. The nobles reveled in luxury and entertainment, their senses indulged and egos massaged, while the servants toiled relentlessly, their labor essential yet largely unseen. The dual demands of servitude and performance placed immense pressure on these workers, forcing them to embody grace under fire in an environment where mistakes were brutally punished. The grand hall, with its glittering chandeliers and tapestries depicting heraldic beasts and ancient victories, served as both stage and battleground. Every gesture, Every step of the servants was scrutinized by sharp eyes, hungry for perfection. The feast was a microcosm of the social order. Nobles seated in comfort and command, servants moving invisibly beneath them, their survival dependent on flawless execution and silent endurance. This moment at 8 o'clock thus reveals the complex dynamics of medieval and early modern court life, where the dazzling spectacle of wealth was underpinned by the sweat and fear of those who made it possible. It challenges us to recognize the human cost behind the glittering facade, the lives shaped by anxiety and discipline, where even a spilled drop could seal a fate. In the flickering glow of candles and laughter, amid music and clinking glasses, the evening feast was as much a test of survival for the servants as it was a celebration for the nobles, a vivid reminder that history's grandeur was built on a foundation of unseen, relentless toil. 9 p.m. Entertaining nobility with silence. As night deepened around 9 o'clock, the great hall of the castle transformed into a stage of refined restraint and quiet servitude. Even after the clatter of plates and the last bite of the noble's meal, the servants remained present, silent sentinels attending to the needs and whims of their lords and ladies. Their duties extended beyond mere tasks. They embodied a living backdrop of decorum, their very presence designed to enhance the noble's leisure without disrupting the fragile atmosphere of dignity and power. The servants' roles during these evening hours were varied, yet uniformly marked by discipline. Some stood poised to pour wine into crystal goblets, their hands steady despite the weight of expectation. Others held cloaks and heavy garments, ready to drape them over shoulders when the cold castle air seeped through the ancient stone walls. Musicians, often servants themselves, played softly in the corners, lutes, harps, or flutes weaving gentle melodies that filled the silence without overwhelming it. Every action was calibrated to maintain an ambiance of calm elegance, a stark contrast to the bustling activity that had filled the day. Yet this was no time for casual conversation or fatigue. Talking was strictly forbidden, a rule as rigid as any law in the castle. Even a simple yawn could be interpreted as disrespect or inattentiveness, risking severe reprimand. The servants moved with a practiced grace, their faces composed and their voices muted to near silence. Their eyes, however, remained alert, watching for any sign that a noble's needs might arise: an empty cup, a dropped glove, a subtle shift in mood. This enforced silence was both a symbol and a tool of power. It reinforced the social hierarchy by drawing a clear line between the nobles, who relaxed and spoke freely, and the servants, whose voices were suppressed in the name of service. The quiet presence of the servants heightened the nobles' sense of control and ease, surrounding them with invisible guardians whose obedience and restraint were on full display. Historical accounts reveal that this atmosphere of silent service was deeply ingrained in castle life. It reflected not only etiquette, but the psychological dynamics of power, where silence equated to submission and presence without voice reinforced authority. The servant's restraint was a form of invisible labor, one that demanded constant self-control and awareness, even as exhaustion from the day's labors pressed heavily on them. In this moment, the castle's great hall was a theater of power and patience. The nobles enjoyed their respite, enveloped in warmth and soft music, while the servants stood vigilant, their silence speaking volumes about the unspoken rules that governed medieval life. The absence of noise from the servants was itself a kind of presence, an ever-watchful calm that sustained the delicate balance of privilege and servitude. Thus, the night's entertainment was not merely for amusement, but a powerful display of social order. The servants' silent endurance, their careful attentiveness without complaint or sound, was as crucial to the noble experience as the finest wine or the most exquisite feast. It was a testament to the unseen burdens carried quietly behind the glittering facade of medieval aristocracy. 10 p.m. Escorting nobles to their chambers. At 10 p.m., as the manor grew quiet under the veil of night, a final, intimate ritual marked the end of the noble household's day, the escorting of nobles to their private chambers. This was a moment steeped in routine and subtle power dynamics, a time when servants stepped into the closest physical proximity with their masters, performing tasks both delicate and demanding, yet never allowed to overstep the invisible boundaries of servitude. The servants assigned to this duty began by aiding the nobles in removing their heavy, often mud-caked boots. This was no simple chore. The boots, crafted from stiff leather and fastened with buckles or laces, required careful handling to avoid discomfort or damage. The act of untying and removing footwear was symbolic, a transition from the public world of status and display to the private sanctuary of rest and vulnerability. For the ladies of the household, the task extended to loosening the intricate laces of their gowns or corsets, garments designed as much to shape appearance as to impose constraint. Servants had to be both gentle and efficient, knowing that any roughness could cause pain or offense. This close contact demanded discretion and tact, as it exposed the noble's physical form in ways unseen by most, yet the servants were ever mindful of their subordinate place. Beyond clothing, servants attended to the warming of beds, a crucial comfort in the chill of stone chambers. Hot bricks, heated in the hearth fires, were carefully wrapped in cloth and placed beneath the sheets to create a welcoming warmth for the noble's body. This practice, simple yet thoughtful, highlighted the servant's role in attending not only to appearance, but to physical comfort and health, blending practicality with care. Despite the intimacy of this service, the boundaries remained rigid. Servants could not leave their masters until explicitly dismissed, a wait that sometimes stretched for hours. This enforced presence served as a constant reminder of the servant's availability and subordination. It was not merely a task, but a test of patience, obedience, and endurance. To leave prematurely was unthinkable and could result in punishment or loss of position. The late hours in these chambers were often quiet and tense. Servants stayed alert, ready to respond to any call, while suppressing their own fatigue and desires for rest. This enforced vigilance underscored the relentless demands placed upon them, where personal needs were secondary to the whims of those they served. This nightly ritual also reflected the intricate social choreography that governed noble households. While servants were entrusted with tasks requiring proximity and trust, they remained invisible shadows, present but unseen, heard but unheard. Their labor was essential to the noble's comfort, yet carefully framed to prevent any blurring of social lines. The act of escorting nobles to their chambers was a poignant example of how power was exercised in subtle, everyday interactions. It embodied the paradox of closeness and distance, physical nearness paired with social separation. The warmth of the sheets and the care in removing boots contrasted starkly with the cold reality that the servant's presence was never their own choice, but imposed obligation. Understanding this ritual provides deeper insight into the complex relationships that defined historical servant-master dynamics. It reveals a world where service was an all-consuming role, demanding not only skill and discretion, but also emotional resilience in the face of invisibility and strict hierarchy. As the nobles settled into their warmed beds, the servants finally received their dismissal, retreating silently into the dark corridors. The night's work was not yet done for many. Elsewhere in the manor, fires had to be tended, security maintained, and preparations made for the coming day. Yet for those who had performed this intimate service, the hours spent waiting beside noble bedsides remain a testament to endurance and the intricate, often unseen labor that sustained aristocratic life. In this quiet, concluding act of the day, the delicate balance of power, care, and control played out, a ritual as old as the social orders themselves, where every movement reinforced the invisible chains binding servant to master. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by grand events, but also by the silent, patient acts performed in the shadows, under the watchful eyes of the night. 11 p.m. Final Firewatch begins. As the clock tolled 11 at night, when most of the castle lay shrouded in deep silence and shadow, a vital but grueling duty began, the final Firewatch. This was the hour when the great stone fortress, vulnerable to the ravages of flame despite its sturdy walls, depended on the vigilance of a lone servant stationed in each wing. The responsibility was immense, to guard the hearths and candles that illuminated the castle's labyrinthine halls, ensuring that no careless ember or forgotten flame would ignite destruction in the stillness of night. The Firewatcher's post was a lonely vigil. Alone in dim corridors, the servant stood sentinel beside blazing hearths or flickering candles, eyes scanning for any hint of smoke or flare. The air was thick with the scent of smoldering wood and wax, mingling with the cold draft that whispered through stone archways. Every crackle and pop of burning logs became a sharp reminder of the ever-present danger. Medieval castles, though formidable, were paradoxically fragile against the menace of fire. A single spark could reduce years of stone and timber to ash, wiping away centuries of power and history in moments. Yet the night's quiet was deceptive. The Firewatch demanded absolute alertness, a challenge when the body craved rest and the mind battled exhaustion. The servant's eyes burned with fatigue, muscles ached from hours of stillness, and the darkness seemed to press inward, threatening to swallow attentiveness whole. The consequences of failure were dire. Falling asleep on Firewatch was not a mere lapse, it was a breach of duty punishable by immediate and harsh flogging. The lash of the whip was intended as both punishment and warning, a brutal enforcement of discipline reflecting the high stakes involved. This severe penalty underscored the paramount importance placed on fire safety in medieval households. Fires could erupt swiftly and uncontrollably, especially in chambers adorned with tapestries, wooden furniture, and flammable cloth. The castle's very survival hinged on the unwavering vigilance of these solitary guardians. Their role was unsung but essential, a silent shield against devastation. Historically, Firewatch duty often fell to the lowest-ranking servants, those least trusted with courtly tasks, but most trusted with this crucial sentinel role. The loneliness and monotony of the watch, combined with the risk of corporal punishment, made it one of the most dreaded assignments in the household hierarchy. Yet it was also a test of endurance and loyalty, a daily proving ground for those who wish to maintain favor and secure their place. The Firewatch ritual also reveals the medieval understanding of risk management within these complex social environments. Without modern firefighting tools, prevention was the only defense. The human eye, trained and alert, was the primary safeguard. Servants were trained to detect the faintest wisp of smoke or the sudden flare of a candle's flame, ready to act swiftly to extinguish potential hazards before they could grow. Beyond its practical function, the final Firewatch carried symbolic weight. It represented the castle's last line of defense at the day's end, the threshold between order and chaos, light and darkness. The watch kept alive the hearth fires that symbolized warmth, life, and security, the heart of the home and the seat of power. To fail was to risk plunging the household into ruin. In literature and historical accounts, the image of the solitary firewatcher evokes themes of isolation, vigilance, and sacrifice. Their quiet endurance behind cold stone walls, through long nights filled with silence and shadow, paints a poignant portrait of medieval servitude's harsh realities. They bore the weight of safety, knowing that their alertness could mean the difference between preservation and catastrophe. Thus, at 11 o'clock each night, as the castle succumbed to darkness, the final Firewatch began. A solitary figure stood guard against flames, embodying a fragile line between survival and disaster. Their steadfast gaze and unwavering presence were the invisible threads that held the night together, a testament to the unseen guardians who kept the fires burning and the legacy of the castle alive. This final duty, harshly enforced and deeply taxing, encapsulated the relentless demands placed upon medieval servants. It is a stark reminder that behind every grand hall and gleaming torch stood individuals whose vigilance and sacrifice made history possible. The Firewatch was not merely a task, but a solemn promise, an eternal watchfulness to guard against the consuming flames of fate. 12 a.m. The kitchen fires are put out. At midnight, as the castle plunged into its darkest hours, the bustling chaos of the kitchens came to a deliberate and solemn close. The roaring fires that had fueled countless meals, fed noble guests, and sustained servants alike were carefully extinguished, leaving only the glowing embers of the hearth to smolder quietly through the night. This ritual of putting out the kitchen fires was more than a matter of practicality. It was an intricate balance of resource management, security, and social order that underscored the harsh realities of medieval life within castle walls. The kitchen was the heart of the castle's daily survival, where wood and coal were the lifeblood that transformed raw ingredients into sustenance. Yet wood was precious, carefully rationed by stewards who monitored consumption with strict vigilance. Burning more than the allotted share was not merely wasteful, it was tantamount to theft, punishable severely. Every log consumed represented a tangible cost, a depletion of the castle's stores, and a potential threat to its ability to endure through harsh winters or sieges. As the clock struck midnight, the cooks and kitchen servants began the meticulous process of calming the fires. The great cauldrons, spit roasts, and ovens were no longer needed until dawn's first light. Flames were gradually stifled, controlled, and finally reduced to glowing embers. The embers were preserved carefully, as they retained heat and could be reignited quickly to jumpstart the next day's cooking. This conservation was critical in a time when fuel supplies were neither abundant nor easily replenished. The ashes that remained told their own story. They were swept and spread evenly across the hearth to prevent smoldering fires from reigniting unexpectedly. Left unchecked, stray sparks could ignite a devastating blaze, threatening the entire castle. The servants charged with this duty had to work methodically, aware that a single error could turn the sanctuary of the kitchen into a scene of destruction. Their work was invisible to most, yet vital to the safety of all within. This extinguishing ritual also carried symbolic weight. It marked the end of the day's labor and the transition into rest and vigilance. By limiting the fires to embers alone, the castle acknowledged the need to conserve its resources for future sustenance, while reinforcing discipline and control over its servants and supplies. The careful rationing of wood reflected the constant tension between survival and scarcity, abundance and deprivation, a theme that permeated medieval existence. In broader historical context, the management of kitchen fires was an aspect of feudal responsibility and stewardship. Lords entrusted their stewards to oversee provisions with a keen eye, ensuring no resources were squandered or stolen. In times of famine or siege, these duties could mean the difference between life and death. Chronicles and household accounts often reveal disputes and punishments related to firewood theft or mismanagement, illustrating how crucial this element was to castle life. Moreover, The midnight extinguishing ritual underscored the division of labor and hierarchy within the castle. Only the kitchen fires were put out. Hearth embers in great halls or private chambers often remained burning, tended by higher-ranking servants or family members. This separation of flame mirrored social stratification. Some fires were for sustenance, others for comfort or prestige. The kitchen's quiet dimming signaled the end of communal effort and the onset of guarded solitude. From a practical perspective, fire management was also linked to the castle's architecture and defenses. Open flames presented fire hazards, particularly in timbered sections or near stored provisions. Controlling fires tightly at night was a precaution against accidental conflagrations that could weaken the fortress or leave inhabitants vulnerable. Servants trained in fire safety routines were essential, their work blending vigilance and routine in a world without modern safeguards. This midnight moment, often overlooked in grand tales of medieval castles, reveals layers of human diligence, economic prudence, and cultural rhythm. The extinguishing of kitchen fires was a ritual woven from necessity and care, from the sweat of servants to the strategies of stewards. It encapsulated the fragile balance of medieval life, where each spark had power, either to nourish or to destroy, and every ember was a guarded ember of survival. In essence, the kitchen fire's quiet extinguishment at midnight was a profound moment of transition. It was the hush after the storm of cooking, a silent promise to rekindle life anew come dawn, and a testament to the constant negotiation between resource scarcity and human endurance that defined the medieval castle's pulse through the long, dark night. 1 a.m. The cold crawl to the sleeping quarters. At the stroke of 1 in the morning, while the manor lay shrouded in darkness and the noble household slept in warmth and comfort, the servants embarked on their cold crawl to the sleeping quarters, a grim, humbling ritual that marked the end of a long, exhausting day of servitude. These quarters were never rooms in the true sense, but often the forgotten corners of the estate, cramped spaces beneath staircases, shadowy recesses in storage rooms, or narrow alcoves barely large enough to stretch a weary body. Privacy was a luxury the servants could not afford. Instead, they found rest in squalor and silence, their bodies pressed close to one another for any warmth that might be found. The sleeping arrangements were Spartan at best. Most servants shared threadbare, lice-ridden blankets, which offered little protection from the biting cold that seeped through stone walls and drafty windows. The blankets, stained and worn, were passed down from one generation of servants to the next, carrying with them a legacy of discomfort and disease. Hygiene was a distant concern in these quarters, overshadowed by the desperate need to find even the smallest measure of rest before the day's grueling labor began anew. In this bitter cold and confinement, nightmares were common companions. The mind, fatigued and bruised by the relentless demands of the day, conjured images of failure, punishment, and fear. Whispers of prayers, soft, hurried, sometimes muttered in secret, offered a fragile shield against the darkness, a desperate plea for protection, mercy, or deliverance. These whispered prayers were echoes of hope, in a world often devoid of kindness, small acts of spiritual resistance against the hardships imposed by a merciless social order. The physical environment of the servants' sleeping quarters stood in stark contrast to the sumptuous chambers above. While the nobles' beds were draped in fine linens and warmed by feather mattresses and thick curtains, the servants contended with hard stone floors or rough wooden boards, thin straw pallets, and the incessant chill of the night. Privacy and comfort were foreign concepts. Rest was interrupted by the noises of the estate. The distant footsteps of guards making rounds, the occasional creak of settling wood, or the low murmur of other servants in fitful sleep. This nightly crawl to the quarters was more than a routine. It was a poignant symbol of the stark inequalities embedded in the social fabric of the time. The servants, essential to the functioning of the manor, were nonetheless marginalized, their needs and dignity overlooked in favor of maintaining the grandeur and comfort of the noble family. Their bodies and spirits bore the scars of this neglect, yet in the shared hardship, bonds were formed. Silent understandings passed between those who endured the same fate. Historically, such conditions were the norm for servants across noble households, reflecting broader societal hierarchies and the harsh realities of pre-modern life. The presence of lice and disease, the scarcity of warmth, and the psychological toll of constant subjugation paint a vivid picture of survival on the margins of privilege. Despite these challenges, the servants persevered, their endurance a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity. To imagine the cold crawl at 1 a.m. is to confront the shadowed underside of history, the lives lived in silence and shadow, the dreams deferred beneath stone arches and beneath the feet of the powerful. It is a haunting reminder that beneath every grand hall and ornate chamber lies a foundation built on sacrifice, endurance, and the quiet courage of those who slept in the coldest corners of the world. 2 a.m. sound of rats and restlessness. In the dead of night, at 2 a.m, the castle existed in a world suspended between sleep and vigilance. The massive stone walls groaned and creaked as they settled in the cold darkness, a low symphony of age and weight. In the shadowed corridors and hidden nooks, the skittering of rats echoed, a reminder of the ever-present pests that shared this ancient fortress with its human inhabitants. Their tiny claws tapped against wooden beams and stone floors, their movements swift and unpredictable, stirring the restless silence that blanketed the castle. For the servants, these sounds were both familiar and unsettling. The night was never truly a time of peace. The ominous creaks and the patter of rats sharpened senses dulled by exhaustion. Every unexpected noise, especially a sudden knock on a heavy oak door, could signal a summons from a noble lord or lady. Such calls in the middle of the night were fraught with tension. They might be simple requests for water or blankets, or urgent demands born from anxiety, illness, or unrest. The uncertainty bred a pervasive fear that kept many servants in a state of half-sleep, their minds alert and bodies tense, ready to respond at a moment's notice. This midnight restlessness was a testament to the rigid hierarchies and relentless demands that shaped castle life. While nobles enjoyed the comfort of warm chambers and uninterrupted sleep, their servants bore the burden of constant readiness. The fear of a sudden summons haunted their nights, preventing deep rest and embedding a sense of anxiety that seeped into every waking hour. The castle, with its dark corners and endless passageways, became a place where shadow and sound wove a fabric of vigilance and unease. Historical records and personal accounts reveal how this environment shaped the lives of servants. Their nights were fragmented by the need to respond promptly to any call, their peace subordinate to the capricious needs of the household. The ever-present rats, symbols of decay and hardship, underscored the tenuousness of comfort and security in medieval times. They gnawed at food stores, spread disease, and reminded all who dwelled within the castle that even the mightiest walls could not keep out the creeping challenges of survival. Thus, at 2 a.m, the castle was alive with sounds that told stories of endurance and fear. The creaks spoke of centuries of history bearing down upon weary bones. The rats whispered of the unseen struggles beneath grandeur, and the knocks echoed the unyielding demands of a social order that left servants ever watchful, ever anxious, caught between rest and duty in the dark hours before dawn. 2:30 a.m. Tending to a sick child of the nobility. At 2:30 a.m., while the world outside lay deep in slumber, and the manor's grand halls were cloaked in silence, a sudden, urgent ritual unfolded in the private chambers, a nursemaid's tireless vigil tending to a sick child of the nobility. This moment, fraught with anxiety and relentless responsibility, reveals the hidden, high-stakes realities of servant life behind the facade of aristocratic privilege. Nursemaids, often among the most trusted servants, were summoned without warning, their rest shattered by the piercing cries of a fevered child. There was no room for hesitation or delay. Every second mattered. A missed call, a moment's tardiness, could mean hours of distress for the ailing child and dire consequences for the nursemaid herself. The stakes were painfully clear. Failure was met not with understanding, but with swift dismissal. As the next morning's changing of the guard replaced the negligent servant without question. The care of noble children was an intricate and exacting task. Nursemaids had to possess not only skill in soothing and tending to illness, but also an unwavering sense of duty and resilience. They soothed restless infants with gentle rocking, administered herbal remedies, and kept a vigilant watch through long, sleepless hours. Their own well-being was sacrificed to the fragile health of the child they served, embodying a profound mixture of compassion and fear. This midnight labor took place in dimly lit, often cold chambers, far from the warmth and safety afforded to the nobles themselves. The nursemaid's presence was constant, yet never acknowledged beyond necessity, her existence defined by service, her worth measured by silent endurance and success in the face of relentless pressure. The environment was unforgiving. There were no modern medicines or comforts. Ailments that today might be minor could quickly become life-threatening. The nursemaid's attentiveness could mean the difference between recovery and tragedy. Yet, despite the gravity of their role, these women lived on the precarious edge of job security, bound by the whims of fortune and favor. Their night was punctuated by cries and restless movement, each sound a summons to action. The tension was palpable, the fear of failure a shadow looming over every moment. To soothe a child in pain was both a blessing and a burden, demanding physical stamina and emotional fortitude. Moreover, the nursemaid's role reflected the broader social dynamics within noble households. Though entrusted with intimate care of the family's most precious members, their position was vulnerable and subordinate. The difference between favor and dismissal could hinge on a single moment's oversight, underscoring the precariousness of servant life. This midnight vigil also speaks to the intersection of care and control within aristocratic homes. The nursemaid's labor preserved the health and future of noble bloodlines, yet she herself remained invisible, expendable, and under constant scrutiny. Her devotion was essential but uncelebrated, a silent thread weaving through the tapestry of privilege and power. In understanding this scene, the hurried summons, the sleepless watch, the unforgiving consequences, we glimpse the human cost behind the nobility's veneer of ease and luxury. The nursemaid's story is one of sacrifice, endurance, and quiet heroism, reminding us that history's grand narratives are sustained by countless acts of unseen care. As dawn approached and the child's cries subsided, the nursemaid might finally rest, though always aware that another call could come at any moment. Her night's labor, performed in the shadows, was a testament to the harsh demands of service and the fragile lives entrusted to her hands, a poignant reminder of the complex and often harsh realities woven into the fabric of aristocratic life. 3 Amman. Checking the moat for intruders. In the stillness of night, long before dawn's first light touched the castle towers, the clock struck 3, the hour when vigilance was most desperately needed and danger lurked unseen in shadows. It was at this unforgiving time that some servants, though not trained soldiers, were ordered by castle guards to inspect the outer walls and the moat, a cold and treacherous boundary meant to keep enemies at bay. This duty was fraught with peril, demanding courage and endurance beyond their usual domestic tasks, for the world outside the hearth was a realm of darkness, cold, and threat. The moat itself, often a deep, water-filled trench surrounding the castle, was a silent sentinel against invaders. Yet at night, it became a landscape of uncertainty. Its waters mirrored the starless sky, concealing slippery banks and hidden dangers. The icy air bit into exposed skin, numbing fingers and toes, while the chilling wind whispered ominous warnings through the battlements. For those ordered to patrol its edges, every step was a test of resolve, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The servants, clad in simple garments ill-suited for the cold, faced not only physical discomfort, but the ever-present fear of stumbling into unseen traps, enemy patrols, or worse, the freezing waters below. Refusal to undertake this hazardous task was not an option. Medieval castles were bastions of strict discipline, where loyalty was measured in obedience and where suspicion fell quickly on those who hesitated. A servant who balked at such an assignment risked accusations of cowardice, or worse, complicity with enemies. In a society defined by rigid hierarchies and constant threats, trust was fragile, and any sign of disloyalty could lead to severe consequences: imprisonment, corporal punishment, or permanent disgrace. The inspection itself was a grim and solitary endeavor. Guided only by moonlight or the faint glow of distant torches, servants crept along slippery stone walls, eyes straining to pierce the darkness. They listened for unnatural noises, the splash of footsteps in the moat, the rustle of fabric against stone, the faintest whisper of a plotting foe. Their hearts pounded not only from cold, but from the tension of potential discovery, knowing that failure to detect a threat could mean disaster for the castle and themselves. Historical accounts from medieval chronicles and household records suggest that such duties, while irregular, were not uncommon during times of heightened alert. Siege threats, rival factions, or rumors of conspiracies meant that every member of the household might be called upon to contribute to defense efforts. The line between servant and soldier blurred when survival was at stake, revealing the precariousness of life within castle walls. Moreover, the psychological burden on those tasked with moat inspections was immense. They were thrust from the relative safety of kitchens and chambers into a hostile nocturnal world where every shadow could conceal a foe. The cold penetrated deep, and fatigue gnawed at their resolve. Yet, to falter or fail was unthinkable, not merely for personal survival, but to avoid the wrath and suspicion of their lords and masters. This duty also highlights the multifaceted nature of medieval servitude. Beyond cooking, cleaning, and tending to lords' needs, servants were sometimes compelled to perform roles demanding physical bravery and mental fortitude. Their lives were bound not only to the domestic rhythms, but also to the martial realities of their time. The moat inspection stands as a stark example of how deeply intertwined survival, loyalty, and fear were in medieval life. In reflecting upon the cold, dark hours spent checking the moat, we glimpse a world where the boundaries between safety and danger were razor thin, where obedience could be a shield or a shackle. The servants' footsteps along the freezing walls echo a silent story of courage hidden beneath layers of stone and tradition, a story often overlooked but essential to understanding the lived realities of medieval castles. Thus, at 3 a.m., when shadows deepened and the world seemed most hostile, the castle's survival rested in the hands of those who dared to walk its cold edges. Their vigilance in the face of darkness was a testament to the harsh demands of loyalty and the unyielding grip of suspicion that governed medieval life. It was a perilous task, a test of courage, and a reminder that even the humblest servant could find themselves on the front lines of history's quiet battles. 4 a.m. The bell rings again. At precisely 4 a.m., the bell rang once more, piercing the pre-dawn stillness with a sharp, relentless summons. This was the herald of a new cycle, a brutal repetition etched into the very fabric of castle life. The sound echoed through cold stone corridors and drafty chambers, stirring servants from restless sleep on straw-filled beds, their bodies aching and spirits weighed down by exhaustion. The ringing bell was both a command and a curse, signaling the start of another day of unyielding labor and rigid obedience, a relentless rhythm scarcely altered by the passage of time. The castle servants, often nameless and faceless in the grand tapestry of history, lived lives of ceaseless toil, bound by rigid hierarchy and social expectation. The 4 a.m. bell was their awakening, a stark reminder that their existence was measured not in personal freedom or rest, but in service to the nobility and the preservation of the household. In the dim light, many rose with heavy hearts and aching limbs, slipping silently into the shadows, aware that their efforts would go unseen, their sacrifices unrecorded. This moment was steeped in a mixture of resignation and survival. The cold stone beneath them was unforgiving. Drafts whispered through ancient mortar, and the chill seeped into bones still weary from previous days. Yet no respite awaited. The castle's daily demands were unyielding: tending fires, hauling water, cleaning halls, preparing meals, and serving lords and ladies who demanded perfection without gratitude. The servants' lives were an endless cycle of invisible labor, punctuated only by brief moments of fleeting rest and punctuated by strict discipline. Historically, these servants were the backbone of medieval castles. Without them, the grandeur and power of the noble families would crumble. Yet chroniclers and historians often overlooked their contributions, focusing instead on battles, politics, and nobility. The ringing bell at dawn symbolized this invisible class's harsh reality, a life defined by repetition, obedience, and the erasure of individual identity. Their names rarely survive in records. Their stories are whispers lost amid the clamor of kings and knights. The 4 a.m. bell was also a symbol of medieval timekeeping's rigidity. Unlike modern clocks, which divide days into uniform segments, medieval time was segmented by practical needs and social orders. Bells marked the rhythm of work and prayer, of duty and discipline. For servants, the bell was an unforgiving master, dictating when to rise, when to labor, and when to rest, though true rest was rare and always fleeting. This strict temporal structure reinforced the social hierarchy, ensuring that every person knew their place and role in the castle's ecosystem. The groans that followed the bell's toll were silent but profound, expressions of fatigue, resignation, and the weight of unending servitude. These sounds belonged to a class whose lives were defined less by personal choice and more by necessity and compulsion. Their obedience was not blind, but born of survival. Rebellion meant punishment, and failure meant ruin. This daily awakening was a testament to human endurance under relentless conditions, a silent testament to resilience in the shadows. In the cold morning light, servants began their tasks. Some would carry heavy buckets of water from the well. Others would stoke dying fires to prepare the day's first meals. Young boys might be sent to light hearths, risking punishment for a single mistake. The castle, a place of wealth and power, was sustained by their hidden labor, their sweat and silent sacrifice keeping its walls alive. This labor was invisible to most of the castle's elite, who awoke later, shielded from the cold and the hardship. This daily ritual of the bell ringing at 4 a.m. highlights the stark contrast between medieval social classes and the often overlooked human cost of sustaining aristocratic privilege. While lords and ladies dreamed in warm beds, their servants braved cold stone floors and long hours, bound by duty and fear. Their lives were marked by repetition, anonymity, and a relentless schedule that left little room for personal agency or recognition. Ultimately, the 4 a.m. bell is a haunting symbol of a forgotten world. The uncelebrated lives that underpinned medieval society, whose stories have been lost to time. It reminds us that history is not only written by those in power, but is equally shaped by countless unnamed individuals whose obedience and endurance kept kingdoms standing. Their groans in the silent dawn echo through the centuries as a quiet testament to human resilience in the face of unending hardship.